Before we dive into this story, leave a comment and let us know what city you're watching from. And don't forget to rate the story from 0 to 10 at the end. Enjoy the story. Dr. Emily Carter's office was a sanctuary of carefully curated calm. Soft gray walls, potted ferns that actually thrived under her care, and a sound machine that played gentle rainfall sounds designed to soothe even the most fractured nerves. Her leather therapy chair had molded perfectly to her body over 5 years of practice, and the notepad in her lap was filled with shorthand observations that would make sense to no one but herself. She glanced at the clock mounted discreetly on the wall. 3:15. Her next appointment was late. Emily wasn't surprised. Court-mandated anger management clients were rarely punctual. They arrived with chips on their shoulders, the size of boulders, and attitudes that suggested therapy was something that happened to other people, weaker people who couldn't handle their emotions like rational adults. She'd seen it all before. The defensive executives, the entitled trust fund kids, the celebrities who thought fame exempted them from basic human decency. 15 minutes late was practically early in the world of forced therapeutic intervention. She straightened the throw pillows on her couch, a nervous habit left over from her grad school days, when everything had to be perfect, or the world might notice she was faking competence. These days, Emily knew she was good at her job, excellent even, but old anxieties died hard. Her credentials were impressive. PhD in clinical psychology from Columbia, specialized training in cognitive behavioral therapy and anger management. 5 years of private practice with a client roster that included some of Manhattan's most high-powered individuals. She'd worked with venture capitalists who punched walls, surgeons who threw scalpels, and one memorable Broadway director who'd been banned from 3 theaters for screaming at stage crew. But this client was different. This client had made the news. Emily pulled up the video on her tablet one more time, even though she'd already watched it roughly 24 times since yesterday. The footage was grainy, shot on someone's phone at what appeared to be a charity gala at the Plaza Hotel. The camera wobbled as it zoomed in on a tall figure in an immaculate tuxedo, dark hair perfectly styled, standing near an ice sculpture shaped like a swan. Nathaniel Cross, tech billionaire and CEO of Cross Innovations, the company that had revolutionized cloud computing and made him one of the youngest self-made billionaires in the country. At 34, he was worth approximately $8 billion, gave exactly 3 interviews per year, and had a reputation for brilliance that bordered on the inhuman. In the video, someone off-camera said something Emily couldn't quite make out. Then Nathaniel's expression changed. His jaw tightened, his eyes went cold, and he picked up a full glass of champagne from a nearby table and threw it directly at the ice sculpture. The swan's head shattered spectacularly, champagne and ice shards spraying across distinguished guests in formal wear. Then Nathaniel launched into what the tabloids had generously called a tirade, and what Emily professionally classified as a complete emotional decompensation in a public setting. The audio was muffled, but she caught phrases: incompetent, waste of my time, and one particularly colorful assessment of someone's intellectual capacity that involved unfavorable comparisons to root vegetables. Security had intervened within 90 seconds, and by the next morning, Nathaniel Cross had been headline news for all the wrong reasons. Tech Titans Tantrum, read the New York Post. Billionaire meltdown at charity gala, announced CNN. The gossip blogs had a field day with it, complete with memes and speculation about drug use, mental illness, or good old-fashioned entitled rich person syndrome. The judge had been unimpressed by Nathaniel's lawyers, his wealth, or his contributions to technological innovation. Mandatory anger management, 12 sessions, once per week, with a licensed therapist specializing in emotional regulation. Failure to comply would result in community service, fines, and potential jail time if he had another public incident. The ruling had been handed down 3 days ago, and Emily had received the referral yesterday afternoon. What the referral paperwork hadn't mentioned, what the judge couldn't possibly have known, was that Emily had met Nathaniel Cross before. She'd worked for him, actually. Briefly. Very briefly. It had been 4 years ago, when Emily was fresh out of her doctorate program and drowning in student loan debt. She'd taken a position as a workplace wellness consultant at Cross Innovations, a fancy title for someone who ran stress management workshops and pretended that meditation apps could fix toxic corporate culture. The pay had been extraordinary, the benefits comprehensive, and the work environment absolutely soul-crushing. Emily had lasted exactly 7 weeks before Nathaniel Cross himself had called her into his office on a Tuesday morning and fired her. The conversation had been brief and devastatingly impersonal. Her programs weren't showing measurable results. Employee stress levels hadn't decreased. Her meditation workshops had a 32% attendance rate and declining engagement metrics. Cross Innovations needed efficiency, results, quantifiable improvements. Emily Carter, he'd informed her with the emotional warmth of a spreadsheet, was not providing value commensurate with her salary. Security would escort her out. Her final paycheck would be direct deposited. Thank you for her time. Emily had been professionally humiliated, financially panicked, and deeply angry. She'd spent that evening eating ice cream directly from the container and composing resignation letters she'd never get to send since she'd already been fired. But in retrospect, getting fired from Cross Innovations had been the best thing that could have happened to her career. It had pushed her to open her own practice, to trust her clinical skills rather than corporate structures, to build something that belonged entirely to herself. She'd built a good life, a peaceful life, a life that did not include Nathaniel Cross. Until now, the door to her waiting room opened. Emily set down her tablet, smoothed her navy blazer, and arranged her expression into professional neutrality. Footsteps approached, confident and unhurried, despite being 20 minutes late. Then Nathaniel Cross walked into her office, and Emily felt the past 4 years collapse into irrelevance. He looked exactly the same. Tall, easily 6'2", with the kind of posture that suggested either excellent genetics or a childhood spent at expensive boarding schools where they taught deportment. His suit was charcoal gray and probably cost more than Emily's entire monthly rent. Dark hair cut precisely, not a strand out of place. Sharp cheekbones, strong jaw, and eyes the color of cold steel that swept across her office with the analytical intensity of someone cataloging details for future reference. He was objectively, almost aggressively handsome in that way that some men were, like someone had designed him specifically to make women forget how to form complete sentences. Those steel gray eyes landed on Emily, and something flickered across his face. Surprise. Recognition. Then his expression went completely blank, smooth as a frozen lake. "Dr. Carter," he said, his voice exactly as she remembered it. Deep, controlled, with the kind of crisp diction that came from expensive education and careful practice. "This is unexpected." Emily rose from her chair, extending her hand with professional courtesy she absolutely did not feel. "Mr. Cross, please, have a seat." He stared at her hand for a moment, as if it might be a trap, then shook it briefly. His grip was firm, his hand warm despite his emotional temperature appearing to hover somewhere near absolute zero. He moved to the couch, sitting with the careful control of someone who'd been taught. That posture reflected character. Emily settled back into her chair, notepad at the ready, her heart doing complicated things in her chest that had no place in a therapeutic setting. "I assume you're familiar with why you're here," Emily began, her voice steady despite the surreal absurdity of the situation. "Court-mandated anger management," Nathaniel said flatly. 12 sessions. Judge Morrison was quite thorough in her explanation. "And how do you feel about that?" Nathaniel's eyebrow rose slightly, the only indication of emotion on his otherwise impassive face. "How do I feel about being forced to attend therapy because I had one moment of frustration at a tedious social obligation? I feel it's a waste of both our time." "Interesting," Emily said, making a note. "You characterize destroying property and verbally attacking multiple people as one moment of frustration. The ice sculpture was insured. The individuals in question were unharmed. I've issued public apologies and made donations to the charity in amounts that far exceed any damage caused." "Money doesn't erase behavior, Mr. Cross." "No, but it does resolve most practical consequences." His gaze was direct, unflinching. "Shall we address the obvious issue, Dr. Carter?" "Which issue is that?" "The fact that you used to work for me. The fact that I fired you 4 years ago. The question of whether you can possibly be objective in this therapeutic relationship, given our history." Emily had been prepared for this. She'd spent half the night thinking through exactly this conversation. "That's a valid concern. If you feel our previous professional interaction compromises the therapeutic alliance, I can refer you to another qualified anger management specialist. However, I should note that my firing from Cross Innovations has no bearing on my ability to provide effective treatment. I'm not here to relitigate the past. I'm here to help you develop better emotional regulation skills." Nathaniel studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "You're not angry about being fired?" "I was angry," Emily said honestly. 4 years ago, I was very angry. But I've processed those feelings, moved forward, and built a successful practice. Your decision to terminate my employment was ultimately beneficial to my career trajectory. How pragmatic of you. It's called emotional maturity, Mr. Cross, which, coincidentally, is what we're here to work on. Something that might have been amusement flickered in his eyes. There and gone so quickly, Emily almost missed it. "Very well, Dr. Carter. I'll stay. Though I maintain this is unnecessary." "Why do you think the judge disagreed with that assessment?" "Because the legal system is designed to punish visible displays of emotion rather than address actual harm," Nathaniel said, as if this were obvious fact rather than opinion. "I didn't hurt anyone. I damaged an ice sculpture at an event I didn't want to attend in the first place, surrounded by people performing social niceties they don't actually feel. The only difference between my behavior and everyone else's is that I was honest about my frustration." Emily made another note. "Tell me about the gala. What led to the incident?" Nathaniel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "It was a charity event. Cancer research, I believe. My publicist insists I attend a certain number of these functions annually for image management purposes. I don't enjoy them, but I understand their professional necessity." "What happened that night specifically?" "I was approached by Gerald Whitmore, a venture capitalist I've had professional dealings with in the past. He cornered me near the dessert table and proceeded to pitch an investment opportunity for the 3rd time in as many months, despite my repeated clear rejections. He was drunk, loud, and refused to accept that I wasn't interested." Nathaniel's voice remained level, but Emily caught tension in his shoulders. "He suggested that my reluctance was due to my inability to recognize innovative thinking. He implied I was becoming irrelevant, that younger tech founders were surpassing me. And that angered you." "That bored me," Nathaniel corrected. "I've heard variations of that speech countless times. But then he made a comment about my father. Emily waited, letting the silence stretch. He said my success was inherited, not earned, that I'd simply capitalized on my father's aerospace fortune rather than building anything of substance myself. Nathaniel's hands, resting on his knees, curled into fists. Which is factually incorrect. I built Cross Innovations from the ground up with student loans and credit card debt. My father didn't speak to me for 2 years after I dropped out of MIT to pursue the company. We didn't reconcile until after I'd already succeeded, despite his conviction that I'd fail. So Gerald's comment invalidated your accomplishments. Gerald's comment was ignorant and insulting. But I've dealt with ignorant, insulting people my entire career without throwing champagne. Nathaniel's voice was clipped now, frustration bleeding through his control. It was the accumulation, the meaningless small talk, the performative charity, the people pretending to care about cancer research while really networking and social climbing. Gerald was simply the final straw. What did you feel in that moment, right before you threw the glass? Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment. Emily watched him wrestle with the question, watched the careful mask slip just slightly. Rage, he said finally. Not just at Gerald, but at the entire situation. The waste of time, the falseness, the expectation that I perform gratitude for the privilege of writing checks to people who don't actually care about solving problems, just managing appearances. Emily made careful notes, her therapist mind cataloging details, while her personal mind wrestled with the strangeness of sitting across from Nathaniel Cross in her professional capacity. 4 years ago, he'd been an untouchable authority figure, someone who'd held her financial security in his hands and discarded it without hesitation. Now, he was legally obligated to sit in her office and discuss his feelings. The irony wasn't lost on her. That's a significant amount of emotion to experience simultaneously, Emily said, keeping her voice neutral and clinical. Rage, frustration, feeling disrespected, being trapped in a social situation you found meaningless. When you experience those feelings in combination, what typically happens in your body? Nathaniel looked at her as if she'd asked him to explain quantum physics to a toddler. What happens in my body? Physical sensations, increased heart rate, muscle tension, changes in breathing. Emotions manifest physiologically before we consciously recognize them. I don't pay attention to such things. That, Emily said gently, is likely part of the problem. Nathaniel's expression hardened. I built a company worth $8 billion by focusing on logic, strategy, and execution. Paying attention to my feelings would have been counterproductive. And yet you're here because your feelings erupted in a public setting in ways you couldn't control, Emily pointed out. So perhaps the strategy of ignoring them isn't as effective as you believe. She watched him process this, watched the subtle shift in his posture that suggested she'd landed a hit he didn't want to acknowledge. Nathaniel Cross was brilliant. She knew that from her brief time at his company. His mind worked at speeds that left most people struggling to catch up. But intelligence didn't equal emotional awareness, and from what she was observing, his emotional literacy was roughly equivalent to that of a particularly stoic brick wall. Let's try an exercise, Emily suggested. I want you to close your eyes and think back to the moment right before you threw the champagne. Picture Gerald's face. Remember what he said about your father. Don't analyze it. Just notice what you feel. I don't see how this is productive. Humor me. You're paying for the hour regardless. Nathaniel's lips pressed into a thin line, but he closed his eyes. Emily watched his face, looking for micro-expressions, any crack in the carefully maintained facade. For several seconds, nothing changed. Then she saw it. A slight tightening around his eyes, his breathing shifting from measured to shallow, his hands gripping his knees more firmly. What are you noticing? Emily asked softly. My chest feels tight. Nathaniel's voice was strained, reluctant. Like something's pressing down. My jaw hurts. I want to move, to leave, to do something physical. That's your body's stress response, fight or flight activation. What you're describing is how rage manifests before it becomes action. Emily kept her tone even, educational rather than judgmental. Most people experience warning signs like this before they lose control. The key is learning to recognize them early enough to make different choices. Nathaniel opened his eyes, and for a moment, Emily saw something vulnerable there, something almost lost. Then it vanished, replaced by his usual controlled blankness. And if I'd recognized those sensations at the gala, you could have excused yourself, found a quiet space, used breathing techniques to downregulate your nervous system, made a conscious choice about how to respond rather than reacting automatically. You make it sound simple. It's not simple, Emily admitted. It's a skill that requires practice, like any other skill. But you're clearly capable of learning complex systems. Emotional regulation is just another system to master. Something shifted in Nathaniel's expression, a flicker of interest that reminded Emily of his reputation for tackling impossible problems. He was competitive, driven, and perhaps she could use that. How long would it take, he asked, to learn these skills? The court ordered 12 sessions. That's a solid foundation, though genuine emotional development is lifelong work. I don't have time for lifelong work. I need functional competence in managing public displays of emotion. Emily resisted the urge to roll her eyes. Of course, he wanted to treat therapy like a business acquisition, something to optimize and complete efficiently. Emotional growth doesn't work on your timeline, Mr. Cross. It works on its own schedule. Everything works on a timeline, with sufficient resources and strategic planning. Feelings aren't a tech problem you can solve by throwing money and programmers at it. Why not? Nathaniel leaned forward slightly, his intensity suddenly focused entirely on her. Emotional regulation is a process. Processes can be mapped, optimized, systematized. You said yourself, it's a learnable skill. It's learnable, yes, but it requires something you seem fundamentally uncomfortable with. Which is? Vulnerability. Emily met his gaze steadily. You can't regulate emotions you won't acknowledge experiencing. And you can't acknowledge emotions if you've built your entire identity around not having them. The silence that followed was heavy, charged with tension. Nathaniel stared at her, and Emily stared back, neither willing to break eye contact. She'd crossed a therapeutic line, pushed harder than she would with most new clients, but something about Nathaniel Cross brought out her directness. Maybe it was their history. Maybe it was watching him try to intellectualize his way out of feeling things. Maybe it was the sheer challenge of trying to reach someone who'd built walls so high he'd forgotten they existed. You think I've built my identity around not having emotions, Nathaniel said finally, his voice dangerously quiet. I think you've built a highly successful career around prioritizing logic over feeling. I think you've been rewarded professionally for that prioritization. And I think the idea of acknowledging vulnerability probably feels like admitting weakness, which for someone as achievement-oriented as you are, is essentially intolerable. You determined all of this from one session? I determined it from working at your company for 7 weeks 4 years ago, Emily said bluntly. Cross Innovations had the highest employee turnover rate in the tech industry. People burned out constantly. Your leadership team was terrified of making mistakes. The workplace culture was brilliant and innovative and absolutely toxic to human well-being. And when I tried to address that, you fired me for not providing quantifiable value. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. So you are still angry about being fired? No, Emily said. surprising herself with the honesty. I'm not angry anymore, but I remember what it was like to work in an environment where emotions were treated as inconvenient obstacles to productivity. And I can see that you've internalized that philosophy so deeply, you don't even recognize it as a choice you're making. Emotions are obstacles to productivity, Nathaniel said flatly. That's not philosophy, it's observable fact. People make poor decisions when they're emotional. They act irrationally, prioritize short-term feelings over long-term strategy. Let personal grievances interfere with professional objectives. And yet you're here because you made an emotional decision that's now interfering with your professional reputation. Nathaniel stood abruptly, and for a moment Emily thought he might leave. Instead, he walked to her office window, staring out at the Manhattan skyline visible beyond. His posture was rigid, controlled, but she could see tension vibrating through him like a plucked string. When I was 14, he said quietly, still facing the window, my mother died. Ovarian cancer. It was quick, brutal, and there was nothing anyone could do. My father handled it by working 16-hour days and pretending nothing had changed. My older sister handled it with therapy, support groups, long conversations with friends. I handled it by deciding that feelings were useless because they couldn't change outcomes. Emily set down her notepad, giving him her complete attention. This was the first real thing he'd shared, the first crack in the armor. I'm sorry about your mother, she said softly. It was 20 years ago. I've processed it. Have you? Or did you simply decide to stop feeling it? Nathaniel turned from the window, his expression harder now. Is there a difference? Yes, a crucial one. Emily chose her words carefully. Processing grief means feeling it, moving through it, integrating the loss into your understanding of the world. Deciding to stop feeling it means suppressing emotions that don't go away just because you ignore them. They accumulate, and eventually they explode at charity galas when drunk venture capitalists say the wrong thing. Nathaniel stared at her for a long moment, and Emily watched something shift behind his eyes. Recognition, maybe, or resistance, possibly both. You're suggesting my outburst at the gala was about my mother's death 20 years ago, he said, his tone skeptical. I'm suggesting your outburst was about 20 years of accumulated emotions you've been treating like data to be deleted, rather than experiences to be processed. Emily leaned forward slightly. Nathaniel, you're one of the most successful people in your industry. You've built something extraordinary. But success doesn't exempt you from being human. And being human means feeling things, even uncomfortable things. He returned to the couch, sitting heavily. For the first time since entering her office, he looked tired. I don't know how to be someone who feels things, he admitted quietly. I've spent 2 decades building systems to avoid it. Then we'll spend 12 weeks building different systems, Emily said. Ones that work with your emotions instead of against them. And if I can't? Can't what? Learn to be someone different. Someone who doesn't treat feelings like system errors. Emily smiled slightly. Then we'll work on that, too. Therapy isn't about becoming a different person. It's about becoming more fully yourself, including the parts you've been ignoring. Nathaniel met her eyes, and for a moment something passed between them, understanding, maybe, or the beginning of tentative trust. You realize this is wildly uncomfortable, he said. Good therapy usually is. I preferred it when I was just firing you. Emily laughed, surprised by the comment. I'm sure you did, but you can't fire me this time. Court order, remember? Unfortunate legal oversight on my part. I'll note your feedback for future judicial proceedings. Emily glanced at the clock. Their hour was nearly up. We should wrap up Before you go, I'm assigning homework. Nathaniel looked pained. Homework. I want you to keep an emotion log. 3 times a day, morning, afternoon, and evening. Note what you're feeling and where you feel it in your body. Just observations. No analysis. This sounds like the meditation app we made employees use at Cross Innovations. The one with the 32% engagement rate? Emily raised an eyebrow. This is different. You're not trying to eliminate feelings or achieve some Zen state. You're just building awareness. Nathaniel looked at her with the expression of someone who'd just been asked to eat vegetables he was certain he'd hate. Fine. Emotion log. 3 times daily. Is there an app for this, or do I have to use archaic, paper-based recording methods? Use whatever medium works for you, Emily said, fighting back a smile. Though I'd suggest something private. You probably don't want your assistant seeing entries about your feelings. My assistant has a doctorate from Wharton and manages a schedule that would make air traffic controllers weep. I'm reasonably certain she can handle knowing I have feelings. Does she know you have feelings? Nathaniel paused. That's an excellent question. They stood simultaneously, the session drawing to its natural close. Emily walked him to the door, maintaining professional distance despite the strange intimacy that had developed over the past 50 minutes. At the threshold, Nathaniel hesitated. Dr. Carter, he said, not quite meeting her eyes. The reason I fired you 4 years ago. It wasn't personal. I know, Emily said. You made that very clear at the time. I mean, it wasn't about you being inadequate. The wellness program was actually showing promise. Employee satisfaction scores were incrementally improving. He shifted uncomfortably, as if the words were being physically extracted from him. I fired you because you asked me directly if I thought the company culture might be contributing to burnout. And you were right, and I didn't want to address it. Emily stared at him, genuinely surprised. You're telling me this now because? Because apparently I'm supposed to be working on emotional honesty. Nathaniel's expression was somewhere between pained and earnest, and because you deserved to know that your work mattered, even if I was too much of a coward to admit it at the time. Before Emily could respond, he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. She stood there for a long moment, processing the unexpected apology, the vulnerability it must have cost him to deliver it. Nathaniel Cross was complicated, damaged, and infuriating. He was also, she was beginning to suspect, more self-aware than he wanted anyone to know. Her next appointment wasn't for another hour, giving Emily time to process what had just happened. She returned to her desk, opening her own notes document. Professional objectivity was crucial in therapeutic relationships, but she'd be lying if she claimed this situation was purely professional. There was history here, complicated history, and she needed to examine her own reactions carefully. The truth was, Nathaniel unsettled her, not because of their past, but because of something she'd seen in his eyes during their conversation, something lonely and searching that resonated with parts of herself she usually kept locked away. Emily had built her practice, her reputation, her entire professional identity around helping people, but she'd also built walls, kept relationships surface level, protected herself from the kind of vulnerability she encouraged in her clients. Physician, heal thyself, she thought wryly. Her phone buzzed. A text from her best friend Olivia. Lunch tomorrow. Need to debrief about my dating disaster. Also, you need to eat actual food instead of those sad desk salads. Emily smiled, typing back a confirmation. Olivia Chen was a corporate lawyer with the enthusiasm for bad reality television and a gift for making Emily laugh until she couldn't breathe. They'd been friends since undergraduate days at NYU, bonded over a shared love of psychological thrillers and mutual bewilderment at how anyone successfully navigated adult relationships. The rest of Emily's afternoon passed in a blur of client sessions, an executive struggling with work-life balance, a college student with social anxiety, a couple trying to salvage their marriage after an affair. Each session required her complete focus, her ability to hold space for other people's pain and growth. By 6 o'clock, Emily was emotionally depleted in the way that came from good therapeutic work, drained but satisfied. She locked up her office, rode the elevator down to the lobby of her building, and stepped out into the cool Manhattan evening. Spring was transitioning into summer, the air carrying that particular urban smell of hot concrete, food carts, and possibility. Emily loved this city with the fierce devotion of someone who'd fought to make a life here, who'd arrived with student debt and determination, and somehow carved out a space that felt like home. Her apartment was a tiny one-bedroom in the West Village, rent-controlled by some miracle of bureaucratic oversight, and inherited from an elderly therapist who'd retired to Florida. It was small enough that her bed was visible from the kitchen, but it had original hardwood floors, a decorative fireplace, and a bathroom with a clawfoot tub that Emily considered one of life's genuine luxuries. She'd decorated it carefully over the years, plants on every available surface, bookshelves packed with psychology texts and guilty pleasure novels, art prints from street markets, and museum gift shops. Emily changed into comfortable clothes, poured herself a glass of wine, and settled onto her couch with takeout Thai food and the guilty pleasure of trashy television. But her mind kept drifting back to Nathaniel Cross, to the careful way he held himself, the moments when his control slipped, and she glimpsed the person underneath. She pulled out her laptop, telling herself she was just reviewing session notes, but instead, she found herself Googling him, falling down the rabbit hole of articles and interviews. There were hundreds of them, profiles in Forbes and Wired, think pieces about his business philosophy, speculation about his personal life. Most of the articles emphasized the same things: his brilliance, his intensity, his obsessive work ethic. Very few mentioned anything personal beyond the basic biographical facts. One article from 3 years ago caught her attention. An interview in the New York Times, where the reporter had asked Nathaniel what he did for fun. His response: "I'm not certain I understand the question. I enjoy my work. The distinction between professional obligation and personal enjoyment seems artificial." Emily closed her laptop, feeling something uncomfortably close to sympathy. What kind of life had no distinction between work and joy? What had happened to make someone so divorced from their own humanity that they couldn't even recognize the question? She knew, of course. Trauma, grief, a childhood where emotions were unsafe or unwelcome. The same stories she heard from clients every day, just dressed up in expensive suits and defended with $8 billion. Nathaniel Cross wasn't that different from anyone else who came through her office door. He was just better at hiding it. The week passed quickly. Emily saw her regular clients, taught a workshop on stress management at a corporate office building, and met Olivia for lunch, where she was treated to a detailed account of a Tinder date that had somehow ended with Olivia locked in a restaurant bathroom after her date revealed he collected taxidermied animals. "I'm deleting all dating apps," Olivia declared dramatically, stabbing her salad. "I'm becoming one of those women with 17 cats who dies alone, but dignified." "You're allergic to cats," Emily pointed out. "Then 17 small, hypoallergenic dogs. The point stands." Olivia studied Emily's face. "You look weird. Different weird. What's going on?" Emily hesitated. Client confidentiality meant she couldn't discuss details, but Olivia knew her too well to let it drop. "I have a new client. Court-mandated anger management. It's complicated." "Complicated how?" Did they threaten you? Do I need to file a restraining order? I know people. No, nothing like that. We just have history. Olivia's eyes widened. History? Like romantic history? Professional history. He was my boss at that corporate job 4 years ago, the one who fired me. The tech billionaire? Olivia's voice rose with excitement. Please tell me it's the hot one who was on the cover of Fortune last month. I'm not confirming anything. Confidentiality, remember? Your face is confirming everything. Oh my God, Emily. This is like a movie. The woman he fired is now his therapist? That's poetic justice. It's ethically complicated is what it is, Emily corrected, though she was smiling despite herself. I offered to refer him elsewhere, but he chose to stay. Because he's clearly still obsessed with you. Because he's competitive and stubborn and doesn't like admitting he needs help. Olivia grinned wickedly. So he's perfect for you. I'm his therapist, Liv. There are very specific ethical boundaries about therapeutic relationships. But you're attracted to him. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. I can read your face like a large print book. Olivia leaned forward conspiratorially. Here's what you do. Therapy him for the 12 mandated sessions. Fix all his emotional problems. Then, after the therapeutic relationship formally ends, you're technically free to date him. That's not how ethics work. But it could be how ethics work if you use your imagination. Emily threw a piece of bread at her friend, laughing despite the complicated truth in Olivia's teasing. Because yes, there was attraction there. Inconvenient and inappropriate, but undeniably present. The way Nathaniel's intensity focused on her, the glimpses of vulnerability beneath his control, the intelligence that matched her own. It was dangerous territory, and Emily prided herself on being too professional to cross those lines. But she was also human. And Nathaniel Cross, for all his emotional unavailability and billionaire complications, was fascinating. The following Tuesday, Nathaniel arrived exactly on time for his second session. Emily noticed immediately that he looked tired, shadows under his eyes, suggesting sleep deprivation. His usual perfect grooming, slightly less perfect. His suit was still expensive, his posture still controlled. But something about him seemed worn down in a way that made Emily's therapist instincts activate. "How was your week?" she asked, as he settled onto the couch. "Productive. We launched a new cloud security protocol that should revolutionize data protection for enterprise clients. The initial market response has exceeded projections." "That's not what I asked." Nathaniel paused, his expression shifting to something almost amused. "You're very direct." "It's efficient. How was your week emotionally?" "Exhausting." He pulled out his phone, tapped a few times, then handed it to her. "I did the homework." Emily took the phone, scrolling through what appeared to be a meticulously organized document. He'd created a custom app for his emotion tracking, color-coded by category, with timestamps and detailed notes. She read a few entries. Tuesday, 7:15 a.m. Feeling, irritation. Location, jaw, shoulders. Context, morning meeting ran over, disrupted schedule. Wednesday, 2:30 p.m. Feeling, frustration. Location, chest tightness, increased heart rate. Context, developer missed deadline, project delayed. Friday, 10:45 p.m. Feeling, unknown. Location, hollow sensation in chest, difficulty sleeping. Context, unclear. Emily looked up at him. "You created an app for this?" The emotion log felt inefficient in analog format. "This way I can track patterns, analyze trends, identify triggering contexts. You're treating your feelings like data, aren't they? Physiological responses to stimuli, patterns that can be mapped and predicted." Emily handed back his phone. They're data, yes, but they're also experiences. The point isn't just to track them, but to sit with them. Understand what they're telling you. What is Friday's entry telling me? Nathaniel's voice carried genuine curiosity, mixed with frustration. I noted it as unknown because I couldn't identify the specific emotion. It wasn't anger or irritation, my usual defaults. It was something else. Walk me through Friday evening. What were you doing when you felt the hollow sensation? Nathaniel leaned back, his eyes unfocusing slightly as he remembered. I was in my apartment. I'd finished work around 10, which is early for me. My assistant had insisted I leave the office at a reasonable hour, claimed I looked like death. I went home, ate dinner, tried to read a book, but I kept feeling restless, uncomfortable. Like something was wrong, but I couldn't identify the problem. Were you alone? I'm always alone in my apartment. I live alone. Do you enjoy living alone? I've never considered the question. It's practical, efficient, no one to accommodate or negotiate with. Emily made a note. What about friends? Social connections outside of work? Nathaniel's expression closed slightly. I have professional relationships, colleagues, business associates. That's not what I asked. I'm aware. He was quiet for a moment, his jaw tightening. I don't have friends in the conventional sense. Maintaining friendships requires time and emotional energy I prefer to invest in my work. It's a logical allocation of resources. Or it's lonely, Emily suggested gently. Loneliness is an inefficient emotion. It doesn't serve a productive purpose. Actually, loneliness serves a very important purpose. It's a signal that humans need social connection. We're pack animals, Nathaniel. We're neurologically wired to need other people. Ignoring that need doesn't make it go away. It just makes it manifest in other ways. Like hollow sensations at 10:45 on a Friday night? His voice carried an edge of self-mockery. Exactly like that. Emily leaned forward slightly. What would Friday evening look like if you weren't alone? In an ideal world, who would you want to spend time with? Nathaniel stared at her, and she watched him struggle with the question. It was such a simple thing to ask, the kind of hypothetical most people could answer without thinking. But for Nathaniel, it seemed to require genuine effort. I don't know, he admitted finally. I can't picture it. When I try to imagine social scenarios, my mind just presents work meetings or professional dinners. What about as a child? Did you have friends then? Something flickered across his face, painful and quickly suppressed. I had a best friend in middle school, Daniel Park. We built computers together, taught ourselves programming, talked about changing the world with technology. His voice softened slightly, becoming almost wistful. After my mother died, I stopped returning his calls. He tried for months to stay in touch, but I pushed him away. Eventually, he gave up. Why did you push him away? Because he wanted to talk about feelings. He wanted me to share my grief, to cry with him, to process the loss together. Nathaniel's hands clenched briefly, and I couldn't. I didn't know how. So it was easier to just disappear. Have you been disappearing from people ever since? The silence that followed was heavy with recognition. Nathaniel looked at her, really looked at her, and Emily saw the 14-year-old boy who'd lost his mother and decided that needing people was too dangerous to risk. Yes, he said quietly. I suppose I have. That's the hollow feeling, Nathaniel. It's loneliness. It's your brain telling you that pushing everyone away has a cost. Then what am I supposed to do about it? I don't know how to be someone who has friends. I don't know how to connect with people beyond professional transactions. You start small, Emily said. You practice, and you accept that it's going to be uncomfortable at first because you're building muscles you haven't used in 20 years. I hate being uncomfortable. I know, But growth only happens in discomfort. Nathaniel stood abruptly, walking to the window again. It seemed to be his processing spot, the place he went when emotions threatened to overwhelm his carefully maintained control. Emily waited, letting him take his time. "When you worked at Cross Innovations," he said finally, still facing the window, "you ran those meditation workshops that everyone hated attending." "I remember. There was one session I observed. I was walking past the conference room and saw you leading a group through some kind of breathing exercise. Everyone looked miserable, except for one person, a junior developer named Marcus Chen. He was actually engaged, actually trying. And afterward I saw you talking to him, and he was smiling." Emily searched her memory. Marcus Chen. Yes, she remembered him. Anxious, brilliant, barely 22. He was having panic attacks at his desk. The breathing exercises helped him manage them. "After I fired you, Marcus quit. He said the company was too high pressure, that he needed a less stressful environment." Nathaniel turned from the window. "I didn't understand at the time. I thought he was weak, couldn't handle the demands. But watching him talk to you, I realized he wasn't weak. He was just human. And you were helping him navigate that humanity in a way I never learned how to do." Emily felt her throat tighten unexpectedly. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I want you to understand that I'm not hostile to this process out of arrogance. I'm hostile because I genuinely don't know how to be the kind of person who acknowledges weakness, or needs help, or admits to feeling lonely on Friday nights." His gray eyes met hers, unguarded for perhaps the first time. "I'm here because a judge ordered me to be, but I'm staying because somewhere underneath all the systems and efficiency and I had emotional suppression, I think I actually want to learn what you're trying to teach me." The vulnerability in that admission hit Emily harder than she'd expected. This was breakthrough territory, the moment when a client moved from resistant to genuinely engaged. She should feel professional satisfaction. Instead, she felt something more complicated, something that had no place in a therapeutic relationship. "Thank you for trusting me with that," she said, keeping her voice steady. "What you're describing, that willingness to learn, that's the foundation we need. Everything else builds from there. How long will it take to become someone who can do friendship and connection and all the things that apparently normal humans manage without thinking? There's no timeline. But Nathaniel, you're not broken. You're just heavily defended. And defenses exist for good reasons. We don't tear them down. We slowly build windows and doors so you can choose when to let people in." He returned to the couch, sitting with visible exhaustion. "This is harder than building a company. Different kind of work, requires different skills. I prefer the kind of work with clear metrics and deliverables." Emily smiled. "I know, but emotions don't come with quarterly reports." Unfortunate design flaw. They spent the rest of the session working through specific scenarios, practicing the skill of identifying emotions before they escalated. Emily taught him the basics of cognitive behavioral therapy, the ABC model of activating event, belief, and consequence. Nathaniel absorbed it with the same intense focus he probably brought to board meetings, asking sharp questions and challenging assumptions until he understood the underlying logic. By the end of the hour, Emily felt like she'd run a mental marathon. Nathaniel was exhausting in the best possible way, his intelligence pushing her to be more precise, more articulate, better at explaining concepts she usually took for granted. As he was leaving, he paused at the door again. "Dr. Carter, can I ask you something unprofessional?" Emily tensed slightly. "You can ask. I may not answer. Do you enjoy this work? Sitting with people's pain all day, holding space for their dysfunction? It was an unexpectedly personal question, one that hit closer to Emily's own occasional doubts than she'd like to admit. "Yes," she said honestly. "I enjoy helping people become more fully themselves. And pain isn't dysfunction, Nathaniel. It's part of being alive." He studied her face for a long moment. "You're a remarkable person, Emily Carter." Before she could respond to the use of her first name, he was gone. Emily sat in the sudden silence of her office, her heart doing complicated gymnastics in her chest. The way he'd said her name, Emily Carter, with a softness that hadn't been there before, the look in his eyes, something that transcended the therapeutic relationship and moved into territory that was dangerous and thrilling and absolutely off limits. She needed to process this with someone who wasn't her, someone with objectivity and common sense. She pulled out her phone and texted Olivia. "Emergency coffee needed. Can you meet tonight?" The response came immediately. "That good or that bad?" "That complicated." 8 p.m., our usual place. Bring details." Their usual place was a coffee shop in Greenwich Village that stayed open late and had excellent pastries and a complete disregard for how much time customers spent occupying tables. Emily arrived first, claiming their favorite corner booth and ordering a latte that was probably a bad idea, given how wired she already felt. Olivia swept in exactly at 8, bringing the energy of someone who'd just spent 10 hours in corporate litigation and needed to decompress. She ordered something involving espresso and caramel, then slid into the booth across from Emily. "Talk," she commanded. "What did Hot Billionaire do now?" He opened up about his trauma, showed genuine vulnerability, admitted he wants to change, and called me remarkable while using my first name in a way that suggested feelings beyond the therapeutic relationship. Olivia's eyes widened. "That's a lot. Unpack." Emily spent the next 20 minutes walking Olivia through the session, carefully avoiding any details that would violate confidentiality, but conveying the essential emotional arc. Olivia listened with the attention she probably brought to legal depositions, asking sharp questions and making mental notes. "So let me make sure I understand," Olivia said when Emily finished. "Your client, who also happens to be your former boss and a billionaire, is developing both emotional awareness and what sounds suspiciously like a crush on you. And you're attracted to him, but bound by professional ethics. This is literally the plot of a romance novel." "It's not a romance novel. It's an ethical nightmare." "Can't it be both?" "Liv, I'm serious. I could lose my license if I pursue anything with a current client. The power dynamics alone are problematic even after the therapeutic relationship ends. And that's not even considering the history between us, the fact that he fired me, the reality that we exist in completely different worlds." "Okay, but consider this." Olivia leaned forward conspiratorially. "What if you're exactly what he needs? Not as a therapist, though obviously you're great at that, but as a person. Someone who sees him as human rather than as a billionaire or a boss or a brand. Someone who challenges him and doesn't put up with his bullshit. That's what a therapist does. No, that's what a partner does. A therapist does it professionally for 50 minutes a week. A partner does it because they actually care about the person, not just the client." Emily shook her head. "I can't think about him that way. It compromises my ability to help him." "Does it? Or does it give you insight into what he needs that a less invested therapist might miss?" It was a dangerous argument, one that Emily knew better than to entertain. But sitting in the coffee shop with her best friend, away from the professional confines of her office, she let herself acknowledge the truth. She was invested in Nathaniel Cross in ways that had nothing to do with therapeutic outcomes and everything to do with the man himself. "What do I do?" Emily asked quietly. You finish the 12 mandated sessions, Olivia said practically. You help him like you'd help any client. And then, when the professional obligation ends, you have a conversation with him about whether there's something worth exploring. Like actual adults who are attracted to each other and capable of navigating complicated situations. What if he doesn't feel the same way? What if I'm reading things into it that aren't there? The man called you remarkable, Em. He's developing emotional awareness specifically because you're teaching him. He chose to stay with you as his therapist when he could have gone elsewhere. Trust me, the feelings are there. The question is what you're both going to do about them when ethics allow. Emily sipped her coffee, letting Olivia's words settle. 10 more weeks, 10 more sessions. She could maintain professional boundaries for 10 weeks. And then, if there was still something there, if Nathaniel still looked at her the way he had in her office, maybe they could explore what existed beyond therapist and client. Maybe. The following weeks developed a rhythm. Tuesday afternoons at 3 p.m., Nathaniel would arrive at Emily's office, increasingly punctual, increasingly willing to engage with the uncomfortable work of emotional development. She watched him transform slowly, like a Polaroid developing in reverse, the defensive blankness giving way to something more human and complicated. He was practicing. Emily could see it in the way he talked about his week, the way he described situations with increasing emotional vocabulary. Anger became frustration, disappointment, or righteous indignation depending on context. The hollow feeling got named as loneliness, and then subdivided into specific longings for connection, meaning, or simple companionship. In their 5th session, Nathaniel mentioned having lunch with his sister for the first time in 6 months. She was surprised I suggested it, he admitted. We usually only interact at obligatory family events, but I realized I don't actually know anything about her life beyond the basic facts our father mentions in his annual Christmas letter. How was it? Emily asked. Awkward at first. She kept waiting for me to reveal some ulterior motive, some business reason for the meeting. When I explained I just wanted to spend time with her, she cried. Nathaniel's expression was bewildered and tender. I didn't know what to do. I ended up just sitting there while she cried and told me she'd missed me. It was terrible and somehow good at the same time. That's intimacy, Emily said gently. It's usually terrible and good simultaneously. I hate it. I know. I want to do it again. Emily smiled. I know that too. By their 7th session, Nathaniel reported that he'd started having coffee regularly with Tom Chen, the older brother of Marcus, the developer who'd quit. Tom worked in a different tech sector and had no connection to cross-innovations, which made the friendship feel safer, less transactional. We talk about programming languages and artificial intelligence, and whether consciousness can ever truly be replicated in machines, Nathaniel said. And sometimes he tells me about his divorce or his kids' soccer games, and I'm learning to just listen without trying to solve everything. How does that feel? Emily asked. Uncomfortable, but less uncomfortable than loneliness. Progress. In their 8th session, something shifted. Nathaniel arrived looking agitated, his usual control frayed at the edges. He sat down heavily, ran a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration Emily had never seen from him before. Bad week? She asked. Complicated week. I ran into someone at a tech conference. Gerald Whitmore. Emily immediately tensed. Gerald Whitmore, the venture capitalist from the charity gala, the one whose comments had triggered Nathaniel's public meltdown. What happened? He approached me, wanted to apologize for his behavior at the gala, said he'd been drunk and out of line. He seemed genuine, contrite, offered to buy me a drink and clear the air. Did you accept? Yes. We went to the hotel bar, talked for 2 hours. Nathaniel's hands clasped together, a self-soothing gesture Emily recognized. He told me about his father, how Gerald spent his whole life trying to prove himself to a man who died disappointed in him, how he projects that insecurity onto everyone else, tries to tear people down before they can diminish him first. That must have resonated with you. It did, more than I wanted to admit. Nathaniel met her eyes. I realized I've been doing the same thing, not with words, but with the way I run my company, creating environments where people have to be perfect because perfection is the only defense against vulnerability. Emily felt something bloom in her chest, pride or affection or professional satisfaction, all tangled together. That's significant insight. I did something after talking to Gerald. Nathaniel's voice dropped slightly, became almost hesitant. I called Marcus Chen, the developer who quit after you were fired. I tracked down his number, called him, and apologized. Apologized for what? For creating a workplace that punished human limitation. For not understanding that his panic attacks weren't weakness, but a reasonable response to unreasonable pressure. For firing the one person who was actually trying to help him. Nathaniel's gaze held steady on hers. I apologized for not seeing the value in what you were trying to do until it was too late. The room felt suddenly smaller, the air charged with something that transcended therapy. Emily knew she should redirect, maintain boundaries, but she found herself asking, "What did Marcus say?" He thanked me, said the apology mattered, and then he told me he's thriving at his new company, that leaving Cross Innovations was the best decision he ever made for his mental health. Nathaniel smiled slightly, sadly. He was kind about it, but the message was clear. My company damages people. What are you going to do with that information? Change it. I've already started meeting with HR, restructuring policies, implementing actual wellness programs instead of performative meditation apps. I hired a consultant, someone you'd probably approve of, who specializes in sustainable tech workplace cultures. He leaned forward, intensity radiating from him. I can't undo the past, but I can choose differently going forward. Emily felt tears prick her eyes, entirely unprofessional, entirely unavoidable. Nathaniel, that's extraordinary. It's what you've been trying to teach me, that feelings aren't obstacles, they're information. That vulnerability isn't weakness, it's courage. That creating space for humanity, my own and everyone else's, doesn't diminish success. It enables it. They stared at each other across the small space of her office, and Emily felt the careful boundaries she'd maintained begin to dissolve. This wasn't therapist and client anymore. This was two people who saw each other, who challenged each other, who were circling something neither quite dared to name. We have 4 sessions left, Emily said quietly. I know. And then, the therapeutic relationship formally ends. I know that too. Nathaniel, Emily. Her name in his voice, soft and certain. I know we can't have this conversation yet. I know there are ethical boundaries and professional obligations. But I need you to know that this, he gestured between them, whatever this is, it's not just transference or misplaced gratitude. You challenged me, changed me, saw through all my defenses to the person I was too afraid to be. And when these 4 weeks are over, when I'm no longer your client, I want to take you to dinner. Not as therapy, as a date. Emily's heart hammered against her ribs. She should shut this down, redirect, maintain professional distance. But she was so tired of pretending she didn't feel the pull between them, the electricity that had nothing to do with therapy and everything to do with two people discovering each other. Ask me again in 4 weeks, she said finally, when the ethical complications aren't complications anymore. Nathaniel's smile was slow and devastating. I will. The next 4 weeks were exquisite torture. Emily and Nathaniel continued their sessions, maintained their professional boundaries, and carefully didn't discuss the conversation that hung between them like a promise. But the awareness was there in every interaction, every moment their eyes met, every time his voice softened when he said her name. Nathaniel continued his emotional development work with focused intensity. He talked about reconnecting with old college friends, about difficult conversations with his father, about his mother's death, about learning to recognize his own needs and limitations. He was becoming, session by session, someone more fully human, someone who could acknowledge fear and loneliness and hope without treating them as system errors. And Emily watched, professionally delighted and personally captivated, as this brilliant, damaged man learned to open himself to the world. Their 11th session fell on a Tuesday in early June. Warm sunshine streaming through Emily's office windows. Nathaniel arrived with coffee from her favorite cafe, a gesture that was probably inappropriate, but that Emily accepted anyway. Professional boundaries already blurring at the edges. "One more week," Nathaniel said as he sat down, his gray eyes holding hers with unmistakable intent. "One more session," Emily agreed, her pulse quickening. They talked about his progress, about the changes he'd implemented at Cross Innovations, about his growing comfort with emotional vulnerability. It was a good session, productive and insightful. But underneath it all ran the current of anticipation, the knowledge that next week would be their last professional obligation, and then they could explore what existed beyond therapist and client. Emily should have seen it coming, should have recognized the signs, but she was too focused on Nathaniel, too caught up in her own complicated feelings, to notice the other storm gathering. The email arrived the next morning, formal and devastating. It was from the New York State Board of Psychology, informing Emily that a complaint had been filed against her for ethical violations in her treatment of client NC. The complaint alleged inappropriate romantic involvement during active therapy, boundary violations, and potential harm to the client due to countertransference. Emily stared at the email, her blood turning to ice. NC. Nathaniel Cross. Someone had reported her for exactly the thing she'd been so careful not to do. Her phone rang. Her supervising psychologist, Dr. Helen Rodriguez, someone Emily respected deeply and whose opinion mattered enormously. "Emily, I just got notification about the board complaint. Tell me it's not true." "It's not true," Emily said, her voice shaking. "I've maintained appropriate boundaries. We haven't had any romantic involvement during treatment." "But there have been feelings? On both sides?" Emily couldn't lie to Helen. "Yes, but we've been scrupulous about not acting on them. We've explicitly discussed waiting until after the therapeutic relationship ends." "Discussing waiting is still discussing romantic intent, Emily. That's a gray area that can be interpreted as boundary violation." Helen's voice was sympathetic but firm. "The board is going to investigate. They'll want to see your session notes, talk to you and the client, review the entire therapeutic relationship. This could affect your license." Emily felt her carefully constructed life tilting sideways. "Who filed the complaint?" "It's anonymous. Could be anyone. A colleague who witnessed something, someone at your office building, even someone from the client's life who felt protective." Emily thought frantically. Who would have known about her feelings for Nathaniel? Who would have cared enough to report her? And then it hit her. The coffee shop conversations with Olivia. They'd been careful, hadn't used names, but they'd been in public. Anyone could have overheard, pieced things together. "What do I do?" Emily asked. "You cooperate fully with the investigation. You document everything. And Emily, you need to terminate the therapeutic relationship with this client immediately. Continuing treatment during an active ethics investigation would be damaging to you both." Emily's heart sank. I can't just abandon him. We have one session left. We were supposed to. You don't have a choice. I'll help you draft an appropriate termination letter and referral to another qualified therapist. But Emily, you cannot see this client again. Not professionally, and certainly not personally. Not until the investigation concludes. After the call ended, Emily sat in her quiet apartment, staring at nothing. She'd been so careful. She'd maintained boundaries, followed protocols, done everything right. And still, somehow, it wasn't enough. Her license, her career, her reputation, everything she'd built, was now under scrutiny. And worse than all of that was the knowledge that she'd have to tell Nathaniel. She'd have to explain that their final session was canceled, that she was referring him elsewhere, that the dinner they'd both been anticipating couldn't happen. Not now. Maybe not ever. With shaking hands, Emily drafted the email. Professional, clinical, giving no hint of the devastation she felt. Dear Mr. Cross, due to unforeseen professional circumstances, I am unable to continue as your therapist. I am referring your case to Dr. Michael Patterson, an excellent colleague who specializes in anger management. Please contact him to schedule your final mandated session. I apologize for any inconvenience. Sincerely, Dr. Emily Carter. She stared at the words, so formal and cold, nothing like what she wanted to say. But there was no choice. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. Nathaniel's response came within an hour. What happened? Please call me. Emily didn't call. She couldn't. Instead, she sent another email. I cannot discuss the details. Please understand, this is not a choice I'm making willingly. Dr. Patterson will provide excellent care. Emily, please, let me help. Whatever's happening, we can figure it out. You can't help with this. I'm sorry, Nathaniel, for everything. She turned off her phone after that, unable to face his continued attempts to reach her. The investigation would take weeks, possibly months. The board would review her notes, interview Nathaniel, try to determine whether she'd violated professional ethics. And even if she was cleared, even if they found no wrongdoing, the damage might already be done. Accusations stuck, whispers followed, and Emily knew how quickly a reputation could crumble in the professional psychology community. Olivia came over that night, bringing wine and fury. This is bullshit, she declared, pacing Emily's small apartment like a caged lawyer. You didn't do anything wrong. You maintained boundaries. You were planning to wait until the therapeutic relationship ended. Planning to pursue a romantic relationship with a client is still ethically murky, Emily said tiredly. The board could argue that my feelings compromised my professional judgment, that I should have referred Nathaniel to another therapist the moment I recognized the attraction. So what? Therapists are supposed to be emotionless robots? You're allowed to be human, not when it compromises client care. Did it compromise his care? Did he make less progress because you had feelings for him? Emily thought about it honestly. No. If anything, I pushed him harder because I cared about the outcome. Then you have nothing to apologize for. Olivia sat down beside her on the couch. We're going to fight this. I'll find you the best professional ethics attorney in the state. We'll document everything, demonstrate that you acted appropriately at every stage. You are not losing your license over this. Emily leaned her head on her friend's shoulder, grateful for the fierce loyalty. But underneath the gratitude was a deeper pain. She missed Nathaniel, missed their sessions, missed his sharp mind and slow-blooming vulnerability, missed the possibility of what they might have become once professional obligations ended. I'm not sure I can fight this, Liv, she said quietly. What if the board is right? What if I let my feelings cloud my judgment? Then you're human. And last I checked, being human wasn't a crime. But in Emily's profession, being human came with strict rules and ethical boundaries. And somewhere in the process of helping Nathaniel Cross become more fully himself, Emily had apparently crossed lines she couldn't uncross. The days dragged past with excruciating slowness. Emily met with Dr. Rodriguez multiple times, reviewing her session notes with Nathaniel, preparing for the board interview. Her notes were meticulous, professional, showing clear therapeutic progress. But they also showed increasing warmth in her language, deepening engagement with Nathaniel as a person rather than just a client. "These notes are good," Dr. Rodriguez said after reviewing them. "They demonstrate appropriate clinical care. But Emily, they also show emotional investment beyond standard therapeutic alliance. The board might see that as evidence of countertransference affecting treatment." "I was invested because he was making genuine progress," Emily protested. "Isn't that what good therapy looks like?" "Good therapy looks like caring about client outcomes while maintaining enough professional distance to make objective clinical decisions. The question the board will ask is whether you could have maintained that objectivity given your romantic feelings." Emily had no good answer for that. The truth was, she didn't know. She'd tried to be professional, had maintained boundaries, had resisted crossing lines. But her feelings for Nathaniel had absolutely affected how she approached their work together, how much she pushed him, how deeply she engaged with his progress. Maybe the complaint was right. Maybe she had violated ethics, just not in the ways she'd been trying to avoid. 2 weeks after sending the termination email, Emily received a package. It was delivered to her office, a small box wrapped in plain brown paper with no return address. Inside was a single item, a potted succulent, healthy and green, with a note attached. "Gerald was looking wilted. I thought you might take better care of him than I would. Thank you for everything you taught me, even if circumstances prevent you from finishing what we started. I hope someday you'll tell me what happened. Until then, I'm practicing everything you taught me." Feeling the uncomfortable feelings, sitting with uncertainty, trusting that not everything needs to be solved immediately. It's terrible. You'd be proud. Emily set the plant on her desk and cried for the first time since the investigation began. The board interview took place on a humid Thursday in late June, in a conference room that smelled faintly of cleaning solution and institutional anxiety. 3 psychologists sat across from Emily: Dr. Margaret Chen, Dr. Robert Williams, and Dr. Sarah Okonkwo, all respected members of the New York psychology community, all charged with determining whether Emily had violated the ethical standards of their profession. Dr. Chen led the questioning, her voice professionally neutral. "Dr. Carter, can you describe the nature of your therapeutic relationship with client NC?" Emily had prepared for this, had rehearsed with Dr. Rodriguez. "NC was referred to me for court-mandated anger management following a public incident. We conducted sessions weekly for 11 weeks before I had to terminate the therapeutic relationship due to this investigation. And during those 11 weeks, did you develop romantic feelings for the client?" "I developed respect and admiration for the work he was doing," Emily said carefully. "He made significant progress in emotional awareness and regulation." "That's not what I asked, Dr. Carter." Emily met Dr. Chen's gaze steadily. "Yes, over the course of treatment, I developed feelings that extended beyond professional regard." "Did you communicate these feelings to the client?" "Not during active treatment. In our 8th session, the client expressed interest in pursuing a relationship after the therapeutic work concluded. I told him to ask me again after our final mandated session, when the professional relationship would formally end." Dr. Williams leaned forward. "So you acknowledged mutual romantic interest while still serving as his therapist?" I acknowledged that we would discuss it after the therapeutic relationship concluded, Emily clarified. I did not act on any feelings during treatment. I maintained appropriate boundaries at all times. But the feelings themselves potentially compromised your clinical judgment, Dr. Okonkwo said. It wasn't quite a question. I don't believe they did, Emily said firmly. My session notes show consistent therapeutic progress. The client developed skills in emotional regulation, rebuilt social connections, addressed long-standing trauma. The outcomes were positive by any clinical measure. The outcomes might have been positive despite the countertransference, not because of it, Dr. Williams suggested. Can you honestly say your feelings didn't affect your treatment approach? Emily took a breath, choosing honesty over self-protection. My feelings motivated me to push harder, to challenge him more directly, to refuse to accept surface-level responses. Did that affect my approach? Yes. Did it compromise the clinical work? I don't believe so. If anything, it made me more committed to genuine therapeutic progress rather than performative change. That's a rationalization, Dr. Carter, Dr. Chen said, not unkindly. You're arguing that your romantic interest made you a better therapist, which is ethically problematic, regardless of outcomes. I'm arguing that therapists are human beings, Emily said, feeling something fierce rise in her chest. We're not blank slates or emotionless mirrors. We're people who form connections, who care about our clients, who invest in their growth. The question isn't whether we have feelings. The question is whether we act on them inappropriately or allow them to harm the therapeutic relationship. I did neither. You acknowledged mutual romantic intent while the client was still in treatment, Dr. Williams pointed out. That's acting on feelings. That's being honest about feelings while maintaining boundaries about action, Emily corrected. There's a difference between acknowledging that something exists and pursuing it. The interview continued for another 90 minutes, circling the same questions from different angles. Emily answered each one as honestly as she could, defending her choices while acknowledging the ethical complexity. By the end, she felt wrung out, exhausted, uncertain whether she'd helped or hurt her case. We'll review your testimony along with the session notes and make a determination, Dr. Chen said as they concluded. You should expect to hear from us within 6 weeks. In the meantime, you're free to continue seeing other clients, but we recommend avoiding any cases that might involve similar complications. Emily left the building feeling hollow. 6 weeks of waiting, of uncertainty, of not knowing whether her career would survive this. 6 weeks of missing Nathaniel and wondering if he hated her for the abrupt termination, for the lack of explanation, for everything left unsaid. She went home, fed Gerald the succulent, and tried to return to normal life. But normal felt impossibly far away. Olivia dragged her to dinner that weekend, insisting that hiding in her apartment would only make things worse. They went to a small Italian restaurant in the East Village, cozy and warm, the kind of place that believed in generous wine, pours, and carbs as comfort. You did everything right in that interview, Olivia said, twirling pasta onto her fork with the confidence of someone who'd never had an ethical crisis. You were honest, defended your choices, showed that you understand the complexity. They'd be insane to sanction you. They might not be insane, Emily said, pushing her food around her plate. The ethics are genuinely murky. I should have referred Nathaniel to another therapist the moment I recognized my feelings. Why? So some other therapist who didn't care about him as much could provide adequate but uninspired treatment? Olivia shook her head. You helped him, Em. You changed his life. That's what good therapy looks like. Good therapy doesn't involve the therapist falling for the client. Maybe it does sometimes, Olivia said. Maybe the best therapeutic relationships are the ones where both people are genuinely invested, genuinely changed by the connection. Maybe your feelings for Nathaniel made you better at your job, not worse. Emily wanted to believe that, but the board's questions echoed in her mind, highlighting every moment where her personal feelings might have colored her professional judgment. Had she pushed Nathaniel harder because he needed it, or because she wanted to see him succeed? Had she maintained boundaries out of ethics or out of fear? The lines blurred together until Emily couldn't tell what was therapy and what was something else entirely. "I miss him," she admitted quietly. "Is that wrong? To miss a client?" "He's not just a client, though. He's a person you connected with, who challenged you, who saw you. Missing him is human." Being human seems to be my professional weakness. Olivia reached across the table, squeezing Emily's hand. Being human is your strength. Don't let some ethics board convince you otherwise. Emily appreciated the loyalty, but she wasn't sure Olivia understood the stakes. This wasn't just about one client or one relationship. It was about whether Emily could trust herself to maintain appropriate boundaries, whether her judgment was sound, whether she could continue doing the work she loved without second-guessing every feeling that arose in the therapeutic space. The weeks crawled by with agonizing slowness. Emily threw herself into work, seeing her other clients with renewed focus, as if proving her clinical competence could somehow offset the ethical questions surrounding Nathaniel. She taught workshops, wrote blog posts about emotional regulation, tried to be the psychologist she wanted the board to see when they reviewed her case. But at night, alone in her apartment with Gerald the succulent as her only company, Emily let herself feel everything she'd been suppressing during professional hours. The loss of Nathaniel, not just as a client, but as a potential partner. The fear of losing her license, her career, her identity. The anger at whoever had filed the anonymous complaint, sabotaging something precious before it even had a chance to begin. And underneath all of it, a quieter question. What if the board was right? What if her feelings for Nathaniel had compromised her judgment in ways she couldn't see? What if she'd done harm while trying to help? 5 weeks into the waiting period, Emily's phone rang with an unknown number. She answered cautiously, half expecting another board inquiry. "Dr. Carter? This is Dr. Michael Patterson. I was given as a referral for Nathaniel Cross." Emily's heart lurched. "Yes, I remember. Did he schedule with you?" "He did. We had 1 session to fulfill his court mandate." Dr. Patterson's voice was friendly, professional. "I'm calling because I wanted to let you know that he made remarkable progress during his work with you. I've rarely seen such significant change in such a short time frame. You should be proud of the clinical work you did." Emily felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you. That's kind of you to say." "It's not kindness, it's professional observation. Whatever approach you took with him, it worked. He's developed genuine insight, meaningful behavioral change, sustainable coping strategies. That's excellent therapeutic work." "Did he seem—" Emily paused, unsure how to ask what she really wanted to know. "How did he seem overall?" Dr. Patterson was quiet for a moment. "He seemed hurt. He asked several times if you'd given me any messages for him. I got the impression there was more to the termination than he understood." "It's complicated," Emily said, her throat tight. "I'm sure it is. But Dr. Carter, for what it's worth, whatever the circumstances of the termination, you clearly helped that man. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." After the call ended, Emily sat with her phone in her lap, letting Dr. Patterson's words settle. She'd helped Nathaniel. The progress was real, measurable, sustainable. Whatever her personal feelings, whatever ethical lines she might have blurred, the therapeutic work had been solid. Maybe that had to be enough. The board's decision arrived on a Wednesday morning via certified mail. Emily stared at the envelope for a full 5 minutes before opening it, terrified of what it might contain. The letter was brief and formal. After thorough review of the case, including session notes, testimony, and consultation with relevant ethics guidelines, the board has determined that Emily Carter did not engage in sexual or romantic contact with client NC during active treatment. However, the board finds that Dr. Carter demonstrated poor professional judgment in acknowledging mutual romantic interest before formally terminating the therapeutic relationship. Dr. Carter is hereby issued a formal reprimand to be included in her professional file and is required to complete 6 hours of continuing education in professional ethics and boundaries. No restrictions are placed on her license to practice. Emily read the letter 3 times, letting the relief wash over her. A reprimand, not a suspension. Continuing education, not license revocation. She would keep her career, her practice, her professional identity. But the reprimand would stay in her file permanently. Future clients, future employers, anyone who looked into her background would see it, the doctor. Emily Carter had demonstrated poor professional judgment regarding romantic feelings for a client. She called Olivia immediately. I got the board decision. And formal reprimand, continuing education requirement, no license restrictions. Olivia whooped so loudly Emily had to hold the phone away from her ear. That's amazing! I mean, a reprimand isn't ideal, but you're cleared to practice. You survived, Em. I survived, Emily agreed, though the word felt complicated. She'd survived professionally, but something had been lost in the process. Trust in her own judgment, maybe, or just the naive belief that good intentions protected you from messy outcomes. So what now? Olivia asked. The therapeutic relationship is officially over. The board's done with their investigation. Are you going to call him? Emily looked at Gerald the succulent, thriving on her desk, despite her periodic neglect. Nathaniel had sent him as a gift, a callback to a joke from another life, a reminder that he was thinking of her. I don't know, Emily admitted. Maybe too much has happened. Maybe we missed our chance. Or maybe, Olivia suggested gently, you're scared, which is understandable. But Emily, you spent 12 weeks teaching that man to be brave enough to feel things. Maybe it's your turn. After hanging up, Emily sat with the question. Was she scared? Absolutely. Terrified of rejection, of awkwardness, of discovering that the connection she'd felt was just transference after all, or that Nathaniel had moved on during the weeks of silence. But she was also tired of letting fear make her decisions. She pulled up her email, found Nathaniel's last message from weeks ago, the one she'd never answered. And before she could second-guess herself, she typed a new message. Nathaniel, the board investigation is complete. I've been cleared to practice with a formal reprimand for poor judgment in acknowledging mutual feelings before formally ending our therapeutic relationship. I'm sorry for the abrupt termination and for not being able to explain sooner. If you're still interested in that dinner you mentioned, I'd like to say yes. Emily. She hit send before terror could stop her. The response came within minutes. Tomorrow night, 7 p.m. I'll send you the address. I'm glad you're okay. N. Emily stared at the message, her heart doing complicated acrobatics. Tomorrow. She had 1 day to prepare for a date with Nathaniel Cross. 1 day to figure out how to be something other than his therapist. 1 day to decide who she was when professional boundaries no longer defined their relationship. She spent the next 24 hours oscillating between excitement and panic. What did you wear to dinner with a billionaire? What did you talk about when you'd already discussed his deepest traumas and most vulnerable moments? How did you transition from therapist to potential romantic partner without the entire thing feeling impossibly awkward? Olivia arrived at 6 p.m. the next evening, carrying 3 different outfit options and a bottle of wine. "We're doing this properly," she declared, spreading dresses across Emily's bed. "You're going to look stunning, feel confident, and remember that you're doing him a favor by showing up, not the other way around. He's a billionaire, Liv. I'm pretty sure I'm not doing him a favor. He's a billionaire who was lonely and emotionally stunted until you taught him how to be human. You absolutely are doing him a favor." Olivia held up a navy dress, simple and elegant. "This one. It says, 'I'm professional, but also interesting,' which is exactly the vibe you want." Emily changed into the dress, let Olivia fuss with her hair, and tried to calm the butterflies, staging a full-scale riot in her stomach. At 6:45, a town car arrived outside her building. The driver handed her a note written in Nathaniel's precise handwriting. "Thank you for taking a chance on us. N." The car drove through Manhattan as evening settled over the city, golden light painting buildings in shades of amber and rose. Emily watched the streets pass, trying to calm her nerves. This was just dinner, just 2 people getting to know each other without the structure of therapy. It would be fine. Probably. The car pulled up in front of a building Emily recognized immediately. Cross Tower, Nathaniel's flagship property in Midtown. The driver opened her door, and Emily stepped out feeling underdressed and overwhelmed. But then she saw Nathaniel standing in the lobby, and everything else fell away. He was wearing dark jeans and a gray button-down, casual but perfectly fitted, his dark hair slightly less controlled than it had been during therapy sessions. When he saw her, his entire face transformed, a smile so genuine and warm it made Emily forget why she'd been nervous. "Emily," he said, her name soft and certain. "You came. You sent a very persuasive car," she said, trying for lightness despite the way her pulse raced. "I wasn't sure you would. After weeks of silence, I thought maybe you'd changed your mind about us." He gestured toward the elevators. "Shall we?" "Where are we going?" Emily asked as they stepped into a private elevator, the kind that required a key card for access. "Rooftop. I thought privacy would be better than a public restaurant for our first non-therapy conversation." The elevator rose swiftly, Emily's stomach dropping as floors blurred past. When the doors opened, she stepped out into a rooftop garden that took her breath away. String lights hung between carefully tended trees, creating a canopy of golden light. A table was set with white linens and flickering candles, and beyond it, the Manhattan skyline spread out in all its glittering glory. "You didn't have to do all this," Emily said, stunned. "I wanted to. You helped me become someone who could do this, who could plan something romantic and vulnerable and completely terrifying. Seemed appropriate to demonstrate that progress." Emily laughed, some of her nervousness dissipating. "Is this terrifying for you?" "Absolutely. I've been trying to regulate my anxiety for the past hour, using all the techniques you taught me. It's moderately effective." Nathaniel pulled out her chair with old-fashioned courtesy. "Though I'm discovering that some nervousness might actually be a good thing. It means I care about the outcome." They sat down, and a staff member Emily hadn't noticed appeared with wine and the first course of what was clearly going to be an elaborate meal. As the staff member retreated, leaving them alone in their bubble of candlelight and possibility, Nathaniel met Emily's eyes across the table. "I need to tell you something," he said. "About the investigation." Emily tensed. "Okay." "I was interviewed by the board. They asked about our therapeutic relationship, whether anything inappropriate had happened. whether I felt you'd violated boundaries. Nathaniel's gaze held steady on hers. I told them the absolute truth, that you were the most ethical, professional, and effective therapist I'd ever encountered, that you maintained appropriate boundaries at all times, that acknowledging future romantic possibility was done responsibly and with clear delineation between therapeutic work and personal interest. You defended me to the board? Emily's voice came out whisper-soft. Of course I did. You changed my life, Emily. I wasn't going to let some anonymous complaint destroy your career. Nathaniel reached across the table, stopping just short of taking her hand. I also hired investigators to find out who filed the complaint. You what? I needed to know who was trying to hurt you. Turns out it was someone from your coffee shop. A barista who overheard your friend talking about our situation pieced together enough details to file a complaint. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. I've handled it. They won't be filing any further complaints. Handled it how? Emily asked, not sure whether to be grateful or concerned. Legal means. Nothing dramatic. Just a strongly worded letter from my attorneys about the consequences of filing baseless ethics complaints. Nathaniel finally took her hand, his fingers warm and gentle. I know you can fight your own battles, but you were fighting mine, teaching me to be better, and it seemed only fair that I return the favor. Emily looked down at their joined hands, feeling something shift in her chest. This was real, not therapy, not professional obligation, but genuine connection between two people who saw each other clearly. Thank you, she said quietly, for defending me, for understanding that what we had was worth protecting. What we have, Nathaniel corrected. Present tense, unless I'm misreading this situation entirely. Emily smiled, squeezing his hand. You're not misreading it. They ate dinner slowly, talking about everything except therapy. Nathaniel told her about his company, about the changes he'd implemented after their sessions, about employees who'd approached him to say the workplace felt different, more human. Emily talked about her other clients in vague, confidential terms, about her dreams of maybe writing a book someday, about emotional regulation for high performers. You should write it, Nathaniel said. I'd be your first customer. You'd be biased. Extremely. But I'd also be living proof that your methods work. As dessert arrived, chocolate something elaborate that Emily was too nervous to fully appreciate, Nathaniel grew more serious. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Emily set down her fork. Okay. During our sessions, did your feelings for me ever compromise your professional judgment? Did you make clinical decisions based on personal interest rather than therapeutic benefit? It was the same question the board had asked, the same question Emily had been asking herself for weeks. She could give him the easy answer, the one that would smooth over any concerns. But Nathaniel had learned to value honesty, and she owed him the same. I don't think they compromised my judgment, Emily said slowly, but they definitely affected my approach. I pushed you harder because I wanted to see you succeed. I challenged you more directly because I believed you could handle it. I invested more energy in your progress than I might have with a client I felt less connected to. She met his eyes. Did that make me a worse therapist? I don't think so. But it did make me a different therapist than I would have been without those feelings. Nathaniel was quiet for a moment, considering. So you're saying your feelings made you more invested in my growth? Yes. And that investment led to better therapeutic outcomes? Arguably, yes. Then it sounds like your feelings made you better at your job, not worse. Nathaniel smiled slightly. Though I can see why the board might find that logic problematic. It is problematic, Emily admitted, because it suggests that caring about clients romantically could improve therapy, which is dangerous territory ethically. Or it suggests that genuine human connection, in whatever form, creates the conditions for growth. Nathaniel stood, walking around the table to offer her his hand. "Dance with me." Emily looked around the empty rooftop. "There's no music." "There could be." Nathaniel pulled out his phone, tapped a few times, and soft jazz filled the air from hidden speakers. "Better?" Emily let him pull her to her feet, let him draw her close in a way that would have been completely inappropriate during therapy, but felt absolutely right now. They swayed together under the string lights, the city sparkling around them, and Emily felt the last of her professional armor fall away. "I missed you," Nathaniel said softly against her hair. "During those weeks when you wouldn't respond to my messages, when I didn't know what had happened, or if I'd ever see you again. I missed you so much it physically hurt." "I missed you too," Emily admitted. "And I was terrified that by the time the investigation ended, you'd have moved on. That whatever we felt during therapy wouldn't survive the real world. I don't think what we feel is that fragile." Nathaniel pulled back slightly to look at her face. "I've spent 12 weeks learning to recognize my emotions, to trust them instead of dismissing them. And what I feel for you, Emily, isn't transference or gratitude or misplaced attachment. It's genuine affection for an extraordinary woman who saw past my defenses and insisted I could be better." "You were always capable of being better," Emily said. "I just helped you remember that." "You did more than that. You taught me that vulnerability isn't weakness. That feeling things doesn't make me less effective. It makes me more human. That I deserve connection and intimacy and all the messy, complicated experiences I'd spent 20 years avoiding." Nathaniel's gray eyes searched hers. "And somewhere in that process, I fell completely in love with you." Emily's breath caught. "Nathaniel, you don't have to say it back," he continued quickly. "I know it's soon. I know we're just starting this thing between us. But I've learned that honesty matters more than timing, and I needed you to know." Emily reached up, framing his face with her hands. "I love you too. I've been trying not to, trying to stay professional and appropriate, and all the things a good therapist is supposed to be. But somewhere between your Google searches about firing me and late-night conversations about what you were feeling, I fell absolutely in love with you." Nathaniel smiled, brilliant and genuine, and kissed her. It was soft and careful and perfect. The first kiss of something that felt enormous and terrifying and absolutely right. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Emily laughed. "This is the least professional thing I've ever done." "Good," Nathaniel said. "I'm tired of professional. I want real." They stayed on the rooftop until the city quieted around them, talking and dancing and learning each other outside the confines of therapy. Emily discovered that Nathaniel laughed easily when he felt safe, that he was surprisingly romantic when given permission to be, that he'd been planning this evening for weeks with the same intensity he brought to business ventures. "I was terrified you'd say no," he admitted, as they finally prepared to leave. "That you'd decide I was too damaged or too complicated, or that the ethics of the situation were too messy." "You're not too damaged," Emily said firmly. "You're healing. There's a difference. You taught me that too." The car drove Emily home through deserted streets, Nathaniel's hand warm in hers. When they reached her building, he walked her to the door with old-fashioned courtesy that made her heart flutter. "Can I see you again?" he asked. "Tomorrow, or whenever you're free." "Tomorrow," Emily agreed. "But somewhere less elaborate, maybe just coffee and a walk in the park?" "I can do casual," Nathaniel said, though his expression suggested this was a novel concept. "Though I make no promises about the quality of the coffee. I might still send a car to pick you up from a cafe." Emily laughed, kissing him goodnight. "You're ridiculous." "I'm in love," Nathaniel corrected. "Apparently they're similar states." The next 3 months unfolded like a dream Emily kept expecting to end. She and Nathaniel fell into a rhythm. Dinners at small restaurants he'd never have tried before. Emily insisted. Walks through Central Park, where they talked about everything and nothing. Quiet evenings in her apartment, where she taught him to cook, and he taught her about cloud computing architecture. It was normal and extraordinary simultaneously, this building of a relationship with someone she'd first known in the most unusual circumstances. Nathaniel continued the emotional work he'd started in therapy, seeing Dr. Patterson monthly for maintenance sessions, even though the court mandate had ended. "I'm not going backwards," he told Emily one evening as they cooked dinner together in her tiny kitchen. "I spent too long becoming someone better to slide back into old patterns." Emily loved watching him grow, loved the way he navigated conflicts, now with awareness instead of suppression, the way he built genuine friendships instead of professional transactions. His sister Rachel became a regular presence in his life, joining them for dinners, where she told embarrassing childhood stories that made Nathaniel groan and Emily laugh until she couldn't breathe. "He was so serious as a kid," Rachel said one evening over Thai takeout. "Even before Mom died, Dad used to joke that Nathaniel was born wearing a suit and carrying a briefcase." "I was focused," Nathaniel protested. "You were terrified of being vulnerable," Rachel corrected gently. "We all were, after Mom died. But you took it further than the rest of us. You disappeared into work and achievement and never came back. Until Emily, apparently." Emily felt Nathaniel's hand find hers under the table, squeezing gently. "Emily has a gift for making disappearing impossible." "It's my superpower," Emily said lightly, though warmth bloomed in her chest at the casual intimacy of the gesture, the easy way Nathaniel acknowledged what she meant to him. At work, Emily navigated the complicated reality of having a formal reprimand in her file. Some colleagues were supportive, understanding that ethical lines were sometimes murky in practice. Others were judgmental, whispering when she walked past, questioning her professional judgment. Emily learned to hold her head high, to trust that her clinical work spoke for itself, to accept that she couldn't control how others interpreted her choices. "Let them whisper," Olivia said over one of their regular coffee dates. "You helped a man completely transform his life, and you fell in love in the process. That's not a scandal. It's a story. A story with an ethics reprimand and 6 hours of mandatory continuing education," Emily pointed out. "A story with growth and vulnerability, and 2 people who found each other despite impossible circumstances," Olivia corrected. "Also, have you seen the way Nathaniel looks at you? Like you hung the moon and personally invented happiness? That's a romance novel ending, Em." Emily smiled despite herself. It did feel like a romance novel sometimes. The way Nathaniel would show up at her office with coffee, or text her random observations about emotions he was learning to name, or plan elaborate dates that balanced his billionaire resources with her preference for genuine connection over expensive gestures. But it also felt real in ways romance novels never captured. The fights about whose apartment they'd stay at, the negotiations about how much time was enough together versus enough apart, the learning of each other's rhythms and quirks and boundaries. Nathaniel's intensity sometimes overwhelmed her. Emily's need for processing time sometimes frustrated him, but they talked about it, worked through it, brought the same commitment to emotional honesty that Emily had taught him in therapy. 6 months into their relationship, Nathaniel asked Emily to move in with him. They were in his penthouse apartment, a space that was beautiful and sterile in equal measure, all clean lines and expensive furniture that looked like no one actually lived there. "I know it's fast," Nathaniel said, uncharacteristically nervous. "But I hate the nights we're apart. I hate waking up without you. And I keep thinking about what you said during one of our sessions, about how I'd built a life with no room for messiness or humanity. I want mess, Emily. I want your books everywhere, and your plants taking over surfaces, and your terrible cooking experiments in my kitchen. My cooking isn't terrible, Emily protested, though she was smiling. You burned water. That was one time. Nathaniel pulled her close, his expression serious despite the teasing. I want to build a life that has room for you, for us, a space that feels like home instead of a showroom, but only if you want that, too. Emily looked around the pristine apartment, imagining it softened by her presence, made warmer by shared living. I want it, she said, but I have conditions. Name them. We adopt a cat, maybe 2 cats, and we dedicate one room to being a cozy reading space with comfortable furniture and terrible lighting and zero regard for interior design aesthetics. Nathaniel pretended to consider this. 2 cats seems excessive. What about 1 cat and Gerald the succulent? Gerald and I are a package deal. Also, I'm advocating for the cats. They need you. The cats need me? You need to practice caring for something vulnerable and needy. It's good for emotional development. Nathaniel laughed, kissing her soundly. You're never going to stop being my therapist, are you? I'm not your therapist anymore, Emily corrected. I'm your girlfriend, who happens to have professional expertise in emotional regulation and believes strongly in the therapeutic value of pet ownership. They moved in together the following month, Emily's modest possessions looking hilariously out of place in Nathaniel's minimalist penthouse. But slowly, the space transformed. Her books filled custom shelves Nathaniel had installed. Her plants lined the windows, thriving in the abundant light. They adopted 2 cats from a shelter, siblings named Freud and Jung at Emily's insistence, and Nathaniel surprised everyone by becoming completely devoted to them. I never had pets growing up, he told Emily one evening, Freud purring on his lap while he worked on his laptop. Father thought they were too much responsibility, too messy. How do you feel about the mess now? Emily asked from her spot on the couch with Jung. I love it, Nathaniel said, and his voice carried the wonder of someone discovering joy in unexpected places. I love that they need me, and that their needs are simple and honest. They're hungry, or they want attention, or they want to sleep in inconvenient places. There's no complexity, no hidden agendas. They're teaching you unconditional positive regard, Emily observed. Is that the technical term for cat ownership? Among other things. Emily watched Nathaniel with the cats, with her, with the life they were building together, and felt profound gratitude, not just for him, but for the strange journey that had brought them here. The ethics investigation, the weeks of uncertainty, the careful navigation of professional boundaries, all of it had been worth it for this. 2 people learning to be vulnerable together, to build something real and messy and deeply human. One evening, about 8 months into their relationship, Nathaniel came home from work looking troubled. Emily had learned to read his moods now, could distinguish between productive thinking and rumination that needed intervention. Talk to me, she said, pouring them both wine and settling onto the couch. Nathaniel joined her, his body language tense. I ran into someone today, Dr. Margaret Chen, one of the psychologists who interviewed you during the ethics investigation. Emily's stomach tightened. What happened? She asked how I was doing, whether I'd continued with therapy. We talked for a few minutes, completely professional. But then she said something that's been bothering me all afternoon. Nathaniel took a breath. She said she hoped you were doing well, that the board had been concerned about the reprimand affecting your practice. And then she asked if our relationship was still ongoing, or if it had been a temporary thing that resolved once the therapeutic intensity ended. What did you tell her? I told her we're very much together, that we're building a life, that what we have is real and lasting, not some transference fantasy that dissolved in reality. Nathaniel set down his wine glass, turning to face her fully. But it made me realize I've never actually asked you about the future. We moved in together. We adopted cats. We've built this beautiful daily life. But I don't know how you see us long term. Emily's heart raced. How do you see us? I see forever, Nathaniel said simply. I see marriage and partnership and growing old together and all the traditional things I used to think were meaningless social constructs. You changed how I understand connection, Emily. You made me want things I didn't know I was allowed to want. Like what? Like a family. Like permanence. Like someone who knows all my worst parts and chooses to stay anyway. Nathaniel took her hand, his gray eyes intense and vulnerable. Like you, for the rest of my life, if you'll have me. Emily felt tears prick her eyes. That sounds like a proposal. It's not. Not yet. I know you've dealt with enough professional complications because of our relationship. I don't want to rush you into something you're not ready for. Nathaniel squeezed her hand. But I needed you to know that's where I'm headed. That when I think about the future, you're in every version of it. Emily kissed him, tasting salt from tears she didn't remember shedding. I see forever too, she whispered against his lips. I see us building something extraordinary together. And yes, when you eventually do propose, my answer will absolutely be yes. Nathaniel's smile was radiant. Eventually. Should I have my assistant schedule it? Put it in my calendar? You're ridiculous. I'm in love, remember? They're similar states. That night, lying in bed with Nathaniel sleeping beside her and Freud purring on her feet, Emily reflected on the strange path that had led here. She'd lost a client and gained a partner. She'd been investigated for ethics violations and emerged with a clearer understanding of her own values. She'd risked her career for the possibility of love and discovered that some risks were worth taking. Her phone buzzed with a late-night text from Olivia. Saw your Instagram post. You two are disgustingly cute. When's the wedding? Emily smiled, typing back. Eventually. He's very good at planning. Of course he is. He's got a PhD in emotional regulation from the University of Emily Carter. That's not how therapy works. That's exactly how your therapy worked. Own it. Emily set down her phone, snuggling closer to Nathaniel. Maybe Olivia was right. Maybe Emily's willingness to be fully human, to acknowledge her own feelings while maintaining ethics, had created the conditions for genuine transformation. Not despite the complications, but because of them. The proposal came 3 months later, exactly as Nathaniel had promised. Eventually, but perfectly planned. He took Emily to the rooftop garden where they'd had their first date. The same string lights and city views, but this time with all their friends present. Olivia and Rachel had conspired with him, apparently, filling the space with people who loved them both. Emily had suspected nothing. She'd thought they were going to a regular dinner party at one of Nathaniel's colleagues' apartments. When the elevator opened onto the rooftop garden, transformed into an intimate celebration, with Dr. Patterson. And Tom Chen and even Marcus Chen present, with her parents who'd flown in from California, with everyone who mattered. Emily had understood immediately. Nathaniel had gotten down on one knee right there, surrounded by community and love, and all the human connection he'd spent years avoiding, and asked Emily to marry him with a speech that referenced their therapy sessions and her terrible cooking and the way she'd taught him that vulnerability was courage. You saw me when I was determined to be invisible, Nathaniel said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. You insisted I could be better when I was convinced I was fine as I was. You risked your career and your reputation to give me space to become someone capable of this moment. Emily Carter, you are the bravest, most infuriating, most extraordinary person I've ever known. Will you marry me? Emily had said yes through tears and laughter, and their friends had erupted in cheers, and Olivia had shouted, "Finally!" loud enough to startle the cats someone had somehow brought to the rooftop in carriers. The wedding was 6 months later, small and intimate, despite Nathaniel's ability to fund something elaborate. They got married in the reading room of their apartment, the cozy space Emily had insisted on, surrounded by 50 people who'd witnessed their strange journey from therapist and client to partners in life. Dr. Helen Rodriguez attended, having become a mentor and friend to Emily after the ethics investigation. During the reception, she pulled Emily aside. "I need to tell you something," Helen said. "When the board was reviewing your case, I advocated strongly for you. Not because I thought you'd done everything perfectly, but because I thought you'd done something brave. You maintained ethics while acknowledging humanity. That's the hardest balance in our profession." "Thank you," Emily said, genuinely moved. "Your support meant everything during that time." "You taught me something too," Helen continued. "That maybe our ethics codes, for all their importance, sometimes prioritize liability over genuine therapeutic connection. You found a way to navigate both. That's not a violation, Emily. That's mastery." Emily carried those words with her through the evening, through the toasts and dancing, and the moment when Nathaniel surprised her by having arranged for Daniel Park, his childhood best friend, to attend. Nathaniel and Daniel had reconnected during Nathaniel's therapy work, and their renewed friendship had been one of the unexpected gifts of his emotional development. "Thank you," Daniel said to Emily during the reception, "for giving me back my best friend. He was lost for a long time. You helped him find his way home." As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Emily and Nathaniel found themselves alone on their balcony, the city glittering below them. Nathaniel wrapped his arms around her from behind, and Emily leaned into his warmth. "No regrets?" he asked softly. "About what?" "The ethics investigation, the reprimand in your file, the professional complications of how we met." Emily considered the question honestly. The reprimand was still there, would always be there, a permanent mark on her professional record. Some colleagues would always view her with skepticism. Some opportunities might be closed to her because of questions about her judgment. But she'd also helped transform someone's life. She'd fallen in love with an extraordinary man. She'd learned that human connection sometimes defied neat professional categories, and that was okay. More than okay. That was life. "No regrets," she said firmly. "You?" "Only that I didn't Google how to fire my therapist so we could be on equal footing." Emily laughed, turning in his arms to face him. "You're never going to let me forget those Google searches, are you?" "Absolutely not. They're part of our origin story. We have a very weird origin story." "We have a perfect origin story," Nathaniel corrected. "Complicated and messy and ethically murky and absolutely worth every difficult moment." Emily kissed him as the city sparkled around them, as their friends' voices drifted from inside, as their life together spread out ahead of them, full of possibility and love, and the beautiful mess of two humans who'd found each other against impossible odds. The next morning, Emily woke up in their hotel room, Nathaniel still sleeping beside her, and checked her phone to find messages of congratulations from former clients, colleagues, friends. But one message stood out. An email from the New York State Board of Psychology. Emily's first instinct was panic, residual fear from the investigation. But when she opened it, she found something unexpected. An invitation to speak on a panel about ethics and therapeutic boundaries at their annual conference. We believe your experience navigating the complex intersection of professional obligation and human connection would provide valuable perspective to practicing therapists, the email read. Your case demonstrated the importance of maintaining ethics while acknowledging the reality that therapists are human beings who form genuine connections with clients. We'd be honored to have you share your insights. Emily read the email 3 times, stunned. The board that had reprimanded her was now asking her to teach others about the very situation they'd investigated. It was validation she hadn't expected, acknowledgement that her navigation of impossible circumstances held value beyond her own experience. "What is it?" Nathaniel asked, awake now and reading her expression. Emily showed him the email. He read it carefully, then smiled. "You should do it." "I don't know. It might be too complicated, too personal. Or it might help other therapists facing similar situations. You learned hard lessons, Emily. Sharing them isn't weakness, it's generosity." Emily thought about it. About the therapists who might struggle with unexpected attraction to clients, who might worry that their feelings made them bad professionals, who might need permission to be human while maintaining ethics. Maybe her story, complicated and messy as it was, could help others navigate similar territory. "I'll do it," she decided. "But you have to come with me. Moral support." "Always," Nathaniel promised. 6 months later, Emily stood on a stage in front of 200 psychologists, telling her story. She was honest about the attraction, the ethical complexity, the investigation, the reprimand. She talked about maintaining boundaries while acknowledging feelings, about the difference between having emotions and acting on them inappropriately, about waiting until the therapeutic relationship formally ended before pursuing something personal. "I'm not here to say I did everything perfectly," Emily concluded. "I'm here to say that perfection isn't the standard we should hold ourselves to. Ethical practice while acknowledging our humanity is the standard. And sometimes that means sitting with discomfort, accepting consequences, and trusting that genuine connection, approached with integrity, has value even when it's complicated." The applause was thunderous. During the Q&A, therapists asked thoughtful questions about boundary management, about recognizing countertransference, about how to navigate situations where professional and personal feelings intersected. Emily answered honestly, drawing on her experience while protecting Nathaniel's privacy. Afterward, a young therapist approached her, barely out of grad school. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I've been struggling with feelings for a client, and I thought it meant I was a terrible therapist. Hearing you talk about navigating similar feelings while maintaining ethics, it helped more than you know." Emily gave her resources, guidance, the name of her ethics consultant. "You're not terrible for having feelings," she told the young woman. "You're human. The question is what you do with those feelings. Handle them ethically, seek consultation, and trust yourself to make good decisions." Nathaniel was waiting for her outside the conference room, pride evident on his face. "You were extraordinary," he said, kissing her forehead, "though I'm fairly certain several people in that audience fell a little bit in love with you." "Occupational hazard," Emily said lightly. "Therapists are very attractive when they're being vulnerable and honest." "I can confirm that's true." They walked through the hotel, hand in hand, and Emily felt something settle in her chest. Peace, maybe, or acceptance. She'd made mistakes, faced consequences, and emerged with both her career and her relationship intact. more than intact, thriving. That evening, back in their apartment with Freud and Jung demanding attention, Emily's phone rang. An unfamiliar number, but something made her answer. "Dr. Carter, this is Marcus Chen. We met briefly at your wedding." "Marcus, of course. How are you?" "I'm good. Really good. I'm actually calling because I wanted to thank you for what you tried to do at Cross Innovations all those years ago. I was too anxious and overwhelmed to appreciate it at the time, but looking back, you were the only person who seemed to care about employee well-being as humans rather than productivity units." "That means a lot," Emily said, genuinely touched. "I also wanted to tell you that your story, what you went through with the ethics board, it's inspired me. I'm going back to school for my MSW. I want to be a therapist, specifically for people in high-stress tech jobs. And I wanted to thank you for modeling what ethical, compassionate care looks like, even in complicated circumstances." After the call, Emily sat with Nathaniel on their couch, cats purring nearby, and told him about Marcus's decision. "You're changing lives beyond the people in your office," Nathaniel observed. "Your willingness to be honest about your own struggles is giving other people permission to struggle honestly too." "Is that what I'm doing?" "It's what you've always done. With me, with that young therapist today, now with Marcus. You create space for people to be fully human, complications and all." Emily leaned into Nathaniel, feeling the solid warmth of him, the certainty of their life together. "I learned that from you too, you know. You taught me that vulnerability doesn't destroy you. It connects you." "We taught each other," Nathaniel corrected. "That's what love is." 2 years into their marriage, Emily published a book, The Human Therapist, Navigating Ethics and Emotion in Clinical Practice. It became required reading in several graduate psychology programs, praised for its honest examination of the complexities therapists faced when their own humanity intersected with professional obligations. The book dedicated an entire chapter to her experience with Nathaniel, written with his permission and participation. They decided together that sharing their story authentically, without hiding the difficult parts, could help both therapists and clients understand the nuanced reality of therapeutic relationships. The book tour took Emily across the country, speaking at universities and conferences, conducting workshops on ethical practice and emotional awareness. Nathaniel often traveled with her, and several times he participated in panels about the client perspective, about what it felt like to be on the receiving end of therapy that balanced professional competence with genuine human caring. "Dr. Carter didn't fix me," Nathaniel said during one panel discussion at Columbia University. "She created conditions where I could fix myself. She challenged me to acknowledge parts of myself I'd been suppressing, and she refused to accept surface-level change. That's not something that happens in a relationship where the therapist is just going through professional motions. That requires someone who genuinely invests in your growth." An audience member asked the question Emily knew was coming. "But didn't her personal feelings for you compromise that professional relationship?" Nathaniel considered this. "Maybe, or maybe her feelings gave her insight into what I needed that a less invested therapist would have missed." I'm not advocating for therapists to pursue romantic relationships with clients, but I am suggesting that the presence of feelings, handled ethically and professionally, isn't automatically harmful. Sometimes, it's the foundation for genuine therapeutic connection. The discussion that followed was robust, with strong opinions on both sides. Emily participated thoughtfully, acknowledging the legitimate concerns while standing by her experience, not as a template for others to follow, but as one example of navigating impossible circumstances with integrity. After the panel, a woman approached them, probably in her 50s, With kind eyes and a familiar intensity Emily recognized from years of therapy practice. "I was the therapist who filed the original complaint against you," she said quietly. Emily froze, uncertain how to respond. Nathaniel's hand found hers, steady and supportive. The woman continued. "I was the barista at your coffee shop who overheard your friend talking. I'm also a licensed clinical social worker who was furious that you were seemingly violating ethics with a vulnerable client. I filed the complaint believing I was protecting him and the profession." "Why are you telling me this now?" Emily asked, her voice carefully neutral. "Because I was wrong. Not wrong to report what I thought was an ethical violation. That was appropriate. But wrong about what was actually happening between you two." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "I've spent the last 2 years watching your relationship, reading your book, seeing how you've both navigated this publicly, and I realized I let my own rigidity about rules prevent me from seeing the humanity in your situation. You didn't violate ethics, Dr. Carter. You transcended them while maintaining their spirit. That's different." Emily didn't know what to say. This woman had set in motion the investigation that had been the most terrifying period of Emily's professional life. But she'd also done it from a place of genuine concern for protecting vulnerable clients and professional standards. "Thank you for telling me," Emily said finally. "I understand why you filed the complaint. Honestly, if I'd overheard the same conversation, I might have questioned it too. Ethics exist for good reasons." "They do. But after listening to you speak today, I'm wondering if maybe our ethics codes need to evolve, to acknowledge that therapists are humans, that feelings happen, and that the question isn't whether we have them, but how we handle them." It was a conversation Emily had been having for 2 years now, in various forms, with colleagues and supervisors and graduate students. The ethics codes served crucial protective functions, but they'd been written assuming therapists could and should be blank slates. That emotional involvement was always problematic. Emily's experience suggested a more nuanced truth, that emotional investment, handled with awareness and integrity, could be a therapeutic strength rather than a liability. "I appreciate you being willing to reconsider," Emily said. "That takes courage." The woman nodded, shook both their hands, and disappeared into the crowd. Nathaniel pulled Emily close, kissing the top of her head. "That was unexpected," he murmured. "That was healing," Emily corrected. "For both of us, I think." That evening, in their hotel room, Emily and Nathaniel talked late into the night about ethics and humanity, and the space between rules and wisdom. These were the conversations Emily loved most, the ones where they challenged each other intellectually while remaining deeply connected emotionally. "Do you ever worry we're too public about our story?" Emily asked. "That sharing so openly might come back to haunt us?" "No," Nathaniel said firmly. "I think hiding suggests shame, and we have nothing to be ashamed of. We navigated a complicated situation as ethically as possible. Talking about it helps other people navigate similar complexities." "You've gotten very wise," Emily observed. "I have an excellent teacher." "Had. I was your therapist. Past tense. You're still teaching me things," Nathaniel said. "Just in different contexts now. How to be a good partner, how to stay emotionally honest, how to build a life that has room for vulnerability and mess and love." Emily snuggled closer to him. "You're teaching me too. How to trust that my instincts are valid even when they complicate my professional life. How to be brave enough to risk everything for something genuine. How to stop apologizing for being human. We're good teachers for each other. We are." The years continued to unfold in a rhythm of growth and challenge and deep satisfaction. Emily's practice thrived, her reputation for ethical complexity and emotional honesty, drawing clients who wanted more than surface-level treatment. She specialized in working with high-achieving individuals who struggled to integrate their emotional lives with their professional success. People whose stories echoed Nathaniel's in various ways. Nathaniel, meanwhile, had transformed Cross Innovations into a model for sustainable tech workplace culture. The company still pushed innovation and excellence, but with built-in structures for employee well-being, mental health support, and work-life balance. He'd hired Dr. Patterson as a full-time workplace wellness consultant, and together they'd created programs that other companies studied and attempted to replicate. "You know what's funny?" Nathaniel said one evening as they cooked dinner together, a regular ritual they both loved. "I'm more successful now, by every metric, than I was before I met you. The company's valuation has doubled. Employee retention is at an all-time high. Innovation metrics are exceptional. But I care less about those numbers than I used to." "Why is that funny?" Emily asked, stirring pasta while Nathaniel chopped vegetables. "Because I spent 20 years believing that caring about emotions would make me less effective. That vulnerability was weakness that would damage my professional success. And the opposite turned out to be true. Acknowledging my humanity made me better at everything." "That's not funny. That's predictable," Emily said. "Emotional intelligence and business success are highly correlated. You just had to learn that empirically rather than trusting the research." "I had to learn it from you," Emily smiled. "I prefer to think you taught yourself. I just created the conditions." "Always the therapist, always your wife," Emily corrected. "There's a difference." 5 years into their marriage, Emily and Nathaniel had a daughter. They named her Rose, after Nathaniel's mother, and she arrived with dark hair and gray eyes, and a personality that suggested she'd inherited both her parents' intensity. Parenthood brought new challenges and new growth. Nathaniel struggled initially with the vulnerability of loving someone so small and helpless, the fear that he might damage her the way he felt he'd been damaged. But Emily watched him learn, watched him bring the same commitment to emotional honesty that he brought to everything else. "I'm terrified I'll mess her up," Nathaniel confessed one night, holding 3-month-old Rose while she slept on his chest. "That I'll pass on my emotional unavailability, my inability to connect. That's not who you are anymore," Emily reminded him gently. "And even if you struggle sometimes, you're aware enough to recognize it and adjust. That's what good parenting looks like. Not perfection, but consciousness." "You're going to be such a good mother," Nathaniel said, his voice thick with emotion. "We're going to be good parents," Emily corrected. "Together, messy and imperfect and fully human." Rose grew up in a household where emotions were named and validated, where vulnerability was modeled as strength, where both her parents were affectionate and present. She had therapy playdates, because of course she did, where Emily's therapist friends brought their kids and everyone practiced emotional regulation skills while building with blocks. "Our daughter's first word is probably going to be feelings," Nathaniel joked when Rose was 10 months old. It was actually cat, which delighted everyone. Freud and Jung had become her favorite companions, tolerant of her grabbing hands and delighted squeals. When Rose was 2, the New York State Board of Psychology invited Emily to serve on their ethics committee. It was vindication of the most profound kind. The organization that had investigated and reprimanded her now wanted her perspective on shaping ethical guidelines for the profession. "You should do it," Nathaniel encouraged. "You have insight that could help create better, more humane ethics standards." Emily accepted the position and spent the next 3 years helping revise sections of the ethics code related to boundary management and therapist self-disclosure. The new guidelines acknowledged that therapists were human beings who experienced feelings, and that the ethical question wasn't whether feelings existed, but how they were managed, and whether they served or harmed the therapeutic relationship. It wasn't a complete vindication of Emily's experience. The revised guidelines still strongly discouraged romantic relationships with current or former clients, but they created more nuanced language about emotional awareness and appropriate boundary navigation, acknowledging that rigid rules sometimes failed to capture the complexity of real therapeutic relationships. On the 10-year anniversary of their first therapy session, Emily and Nathaniel returned to the rooftop garden where they'd had their first date. It had become their tradition, this annual visit to where everything began. 10 years, Nathaniel marveled, looking out over the Manhattan skyline. Since I walked into your office angry and defended, and certain I didn't need help. You were very certain, Emily agreed. Also very wrong. Also very lucky that the judge assigned me to you specifically. Luck had nothing to do with it. The referral coordinator knew you'd be a difficult case and sent you to someone with experience managing high-powered, emotionally unavailable executives. Nathaniel laughed. So, I was a difficult case? The most difficult. Also, the most rewarding. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the city lights flicker on as evening settled. Rose was with Nathaniel's sister Rachel for the night, giving them rare time alone. Do you ever regret it? Nathaniel asked quietly. The reprimand, the investigation, the professional complications. It was a question he asked periodically, as if needing reassurance that Emily didn't resent the consequences of their relationship. And every time, Emily's answer was the same. Never. You and Rose are worth every difficult moment, every whispered judgment, every awkward ethics committee meeting, every explanation to colleagues who don't understand. I'd do it all again. Even knowing how hard it would be? Especially knowing how hard it would be, because I also know how extraordinary the outcome is. Nathaniel pulled her close, kissing her with the familiarity of 10 years and the tenderness of first love. I love you, Emily Carter Cross. You changed my life. We changed each other's lives, Emily corrected. That's what love does. The final chapter of their story came 15 years after that first therapy session, when Nathaniel was invited to give a keynote address at a mental health advocacy conference. The theme was Breaking Stigma in High Achievement Cultures, and the organizers wanted him to speak about his journey from emotional suppression to vulnerability as strength. Emily sat in the audience, watching her husband take the stage with the confidence that came from years of practice being publicly human. He'd given hundreds of talks at this point, but this one felt different, more personal, more complete. 15 years ago, Nathaniel began, I threw a glass of champagne at an ice sculpture and screamed at people at a charity gala. I made headlines for all the wrong reasons. A judge ordered me to anger management therapy, and I was furious about it. I didn't think I had a problem. I thought everyone else was too sensitive, too emotional, too weak to handle the real world. The audience laughed, recognizing the defensive arrogance Nathaniel was describing. But I went to therapy because I didn't have a choice, and I met Dr. Emily Carter, who was patient and direct and completely unwilling to accept my bullshit. She made me track my emotions like data points. She made me sit with uncomfortable feelings instead of suppressing them. She taught me that vulnerability wasn't weakness. It was the foundation for every meaningful connection I'd been missing. Nathaniel paused, his eyes finding Emily in the audience. She smiled, tears already threatening. The story gets complicated here, Nathaniel continued, because somewhere in the process of learning to be human, I fell in love with my therapist, and she, despite every ethical guideline warning against it, developed feelings for me too. We didn't act on those feelings during therapy. We waited until our professional relationship formally ended, but someone reported the situation to the licensing board, and Dr. Carter faced an ethics investigation that could have ended her career. The audience was completely silent now, hanging on every word. She received a formal reprimand for acknowledging mutual romantic interest before our final session. That reprimand sits in her permanent professional file. Some colleagues have questioned her judgment. Some opportunities were closed to her because of it. Nathaniel's voice grew stronger. And I want to be very clear. Dr. Carter did nothing wrong. She maintained appropriate boundaries. She prioritized my therapeutic progress over personal feelings. She demonstrated what ethical practice looks like when you acknowledge that therapists are human beings, not robots. He gestured to Emily. Dr. Carter, would you join me up here, please? Emily's heart raced. This wasn't part of the plan they'd discussed. But she stood, making her way to the stage, Nathaniel's hand warm and steady as he helped her up the stairs. 15 years ago, this woman taught me how to feel, Nathaniel said, his voice thick with emotion. She risked her career to give me space to become someone capable of love, connection, and genuine humanity. We've been married for 13 years now. We have a daughter who's learning emotional literacy from birth because of the foundation Dr. Carter built. And I've spent the last 15 years trying to figure out how to thank her for the gift she gave me. He turned to face Emily fully, and she saw tears in his gray eyes, genuine emotion he no longer tried to hide. Emily, you taught me that vulnerability is courage. That feeling things doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. That love is worth every risk, every complication, every difficult conversation. And you did all of that while maintaining your integrity, your ethics, and your commitment to helping people become their fullest selves. Nathaniel pulled out his phone, tapped a few times, and the screen behind them lit up with images. Session notes from their therapy work, carefully redacted, but showing the progression of his emotional development. Emails they'd exchanged after the therapeutic relationship ended. Photos from their wedding, from Rose's birth, from their life together. This is what it looks like when someone's life is completely transformed by good therapy, Nathaniel said to the audience. Not just symptom reduction or behavioral modification, but fundamental change in how someone experiences being alive. And it happened because one brave therapist was willing to see me as human, to challenge me to be better, and to trust that authentic connection, handled with integrity, could coexist with professional ethics. The audience erupted in applause. Emily stood beside Nathaniel, tears streaming freely now, overwhelmed by the public validation of everything they'd been through. When the applause finally quieted, Emily took the microphone. I want to add something, she said, her voice not quite steady. What Nathaniel described makes me sound heroic, but the truth is I was terrified through most of our early relationship. Terrified of the ethics investigation. Terrified I'd made mistakes. Terrified that my feelings had compromised my professional judgment. And I've spent 15 years wrestling with the question of whether I did the right thing. She looked out at the audience, at faces that reflected her own struggles and uncertainties. I still don't know if I did everything right. I probably made mistakes. I definitely complicated my professional life in ways I'm still navigating. But I know this. Genuine therapeutic connection requires therapists to be authentic humans, not perfect blank slates. It requires us to feel things, to care deeply, to invest in our clients' growth in ways that sometimes blur the neat boundaries our ethics codes try to draw. Emily squeezed Nathaniel's hand. I don't know what the right answer is for every therapeutic relationship. I just know that in this particular case, with this particular person, being fully human while maintaining ethical integrity was the right choice. And if I had to do it over again, knowing all the complications and consequences, I'd make the same choice. The applause was thunderous. After the keynote, dozens of therapists approached them, sharing their own stories of navigating feelings for clients, of struggling with the gap between ethics codes and human reality, of wanting permission to be authentic while remaining professional. "Thank you," a young therapist said, tears in her eyes. "I've been carrying so much shame about developing feelings for a client. Hearing you talk about it openly, acknowledging the complexity, instead of just saying it's wrong, it helps more than you know." Emily hugged her, shared resources, offered the same compassion she wished she'd had during her own investigation. That evening, back in their hotel room, Nathaniel held Emily while she cried. Release, relief, gratitude, all tangled together. "Why are you crying?" he asked softly. "That was extraordinary. You were extraordinary." "Because I've spent 15 years feeling like I did something wrong," Emily said through tears. "Carrying shame about the reprimand, about complicating my career, about falling in love with you when I was supposed to maintain professional distance. And today, standing on that stage, I finally felt like maybe it was okay. Maybe being human isn't something to apologize for." "It's never been something to apologize for," Nathaniel said firmly. "You saved my life, Emily. You gave me the tools to become someone capable of love and connection, and all the messy, beautiful parts of being alive. That's not a mistake. That's a miracle." Emily kissed him, tasting salt from both their tears. "We saved each other." "We did," Nathaniel agreed. "And we're still saving each other, every day." They flew home the next morning to Rose, now 13, and already showing signs of her father's intensity and her mother's emotional intelligence. She'd been following the conference on social media, had seen videos of their keynote. "That was really brave, Mom," Rose said, hugging Emily fiercely. "Talking about the hard stuff publicly. I'm proud of you." "Thank you, sweetheart. That means everything. Also, I told my friends that my parents have the weirdest love story ever, and they're all jealous because it's way more interesting than how their boring parents met." Nathaniel laughed. "I'm glad our ethical complications translate to social currency." "That's not what I said, Dad. I said your story is proof that taking risks for love is worth it, even when it's scary and complicated, and everyone thinks you're wrong." Emily felt her throat tighten with emotion. This was what they'd been building all along, a family where vulnerability was valued, where complicated truths were acknowledged, where love was understood as something worth fighting for, despite obstacles. That night, after Rose went to bed, Emily and Nathaniel sat in their reading room, still the coziest space in their apartment, still filled with books and terrible lighting and complete disregard for design aesthetics. Freud and Jung had passed away years ago, replaced by two new cats named Rogers and Pearls. Gerald the succulent had become Gerald Sr., surrounded by a whole family of plants Emily had propagated from him. "Do you remember the first time I came to your office?" Nathaniel asked, his voice soft in the quiet space. "Of course. You were 20 minutes late and radiating hostility." "I was terrified," Nathaniel corrected. "Terrified that therapy would expose me as weak or broken or insufficient. Terrified that if I started feeling things, I wouldn't be able to stop. Terrified that acknowledging vulnerability would destroy everything I'd built. And now I know that vulnerability built everything that actually matters. My relationship with you, with Rose, with my sister, my friendships, my company culture, my ability to wake up every morning and feel grateful instead of just driven. All of it came from learning to be human." Emily leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. You taught me things too. How to be brave enough to trust my own judgment even when institutions questioned it. How to fight for what matters despite consequences. How to stop apologizing for being fully human in a profession that sometimes forgets therapists are human too. We're good for each other, Nathaniel said, kissing the top of her head. We are, Emily agreed. Messy and complicated, and ethically murky and absolutely perfect. They sat together in comfortable silence, the kind that only came from 15 years of building a life together. Outside, the city hummed with its endless energy. Inside, in their cozy reading room with cats purring and plants thriving, Emily and Nathaniel existed in the space they'd created. A space where vulnerability was strength, where complicated love was celebrated, where being fully human was not just accepted, but cherished. It hadn't been easy. It had cost Emily professionally in ways she still navigated. It had required Nathaniel to completely rebuild his understanding of himself and relationships. It had demanded that they both be braver than was comfortable, more honest than was safe, more willing to risk everything than was rational. But sitting there, 15 years into the strange journey that had begun with court-mandated anger management and a therapist who refused to accept his defenses, Emily knew with absolute certainty that every difficult moment had been worth it. Some love. What did you think of their story? Share your thoughts in the comments. On a scale from 0 to 10, what's your rating? Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to follow all our stories, and check out more emotional stories by clicking on the end screen.